Jack. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Any changes to the agenda?
The only notations on the agenda, nothing is edited or deleted. Just when we get to the Facilities Committee, there's no recommendation or action for the Warrior Stadium Civil Engineering RFP, and no action tonight on the baseball dugouts. Those were listed just as precautionary items in the event that we were going to have any action at the facilities meeting, but at this point there were not. So if there's any questions when we get to those items, we can certainly answer them at that point, but there's no action on either of those this evening. Both of those will come back in the future.
Okay, and then we also had an updated staff changes in front of us for the meeting.
Yes.
Need approval of the agenda, please.
So move.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. This is the time for our budget hearing, 2016-17. We will be taking action on the, basically the third draft of this budget later on in our agendas, but I guess I'll turn it over to Steve at this time.
Thank you, Peggy. I'd like just to take a few minutes and provide a high-level overview of the third draft of the budget. I do have copies in the back of the room if anyone is interested in seeing them. They are available as well. If any members of the public would like to come in to Bethel Circle, we can make hard copies available. If you're watching this later on, we do have the third draft of the budget posted on the district webpage. Members of the public want to go to the Waunakee website, go to business services and look at budget planning. All of the various drafts of the budget are available for the public to review. The budget planning process really begins with a enrollment projection, and when we were looking at enrollment projections for the 2016-17 school year, we are estimating that 66 additional students would be enrolling in the school system. That information is identified in the budget document. There's a table that explains the previous enrollment as well as the estimated enrollment. That then drives a lot of decisions that are made because the school board has class size guidelines that we need to stay within. And as an example of that, the increase in the student enrollment has required us to hire an additional second grade teacher at Heritage Elementary School for next year. One of the largest revenue sources for public schools is state equalization aid. On July 1st, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction released estimates to every school in the state of Wisconsin as to the amount of funding they would receive from equalization aid. The state is adding $105 million into the pot for schools in 16-17. The Waunakee School District is receiving an increase that is identified in the budget. Let's find the page for you. It is on page 9 if you're looking at the budget document. We're receiving an increase of almost $700,000 in state equalization aid. That's a very positive increase and has a direct impact on the property tax levy for the community. That number will be finalized in October when all of the final information is shared with the schools. One very interesting note, if we don't fully spend our 15-16 budget, which we shouldn't because we have referendum funds that are not being expended this year, our state aid actually will increase because we are in what's called the third tier of the state aid system, or negative tertiary, which means that we actually lose some money in the state aid formula system. So by not fully expending our budget, we actually should see that number increase in the fall, which is a positive. In this budget, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Steve, is that number predicated without the 66 students, or is?
So that's a good question. So the state aid actually looks backward a year.
Okay.
So the revenue cap looks forward, but the state aid, which is really unique, looks backward. So it actually looks at the student count from the 15-16 year averages
Okay.
them, and then looks at what our final spending will be.
Okay.
So the 66 students, if those students do enroll in the district, will affect the revenue cap in 16-17 and the state aid in 17-18, so the year following.
Okay.
The revenue cap increase in this budget is 0, So when the state approved their 2-year budget, each year for the revenue cap is 0. However, thankfully, there was a $100 per student categorical aid added into the state budget. So that does provide some revenue increases to public schools in Wisconsin. And it allows us to have a better budget picture than for 15-16, but still a very limited amount of resources being provided to public schools in that state budget process. One of the major factors in our budget process is really still the referendum. So in November of 2014, the public approved the referendum. There were several questions, and they are all being phased in over a period of time. So in the 16-17 budget, one of the most significant impacts is the debt service borrowing being completed. So the budget committee brought recommendations for a financial plan forward to the school board. The plan was implemented, and as a result of that plan, we are seeing the bond issues now being repaid. The positive news about that plan is that the cost impact to the community is lower than what was advertised during the referendum process. That was lower for a couple of reasons, but primarily being the budget committee recommending, locking in those interest rates when they were very low early on during the construction process. So we are seeing that bond issue phase in. The next thing we're seeing phased in is the operational referendum question, which is phased in over a 4-year period of time. So the 2016-17 year is the 3rd year of the 4-year phase-in. The intermediate school opens this fall, which means the majority of those funds in 16-17 will be required to open and operate the school, which is a different situation than in 15-16 when we had a significant amount of flexibility because the school was not open yet. You will notice that in the budget documents on page 12, we outline all of the new positions for the 16-17 school year. A majority of those are all related to the referendum and the additional square footage being open in the district. There are a few positions that have been added that are not directly related to the referendum. An example of that would be the math interventionist at our Reedham Elementary School. Another example would be the expansion of the Mandarin Chinese program to the middle school. So there are some positions that are not directly connected to the referendum. For returning staff, the board has made a decision again to evaluate pay increases in the fall. We do have placeholders in the budget for staff salary increases. The hope is that the student count or the open enrollment count or other changes that may occur in the fall will increase the amount of revenues available for staff pay increases. On the benefits side, we continue to be in our long-term partnership with Dean Health Insurance. That has been extremely positive for the district, has limited our insurance increase to 5% on the health insurance. Otherwise, it would have been significantly higher than that if we wouldn't have been in that long-term agreement. Overall, the budget accomplishes continuing to implement the referendum, both on the debt service side and the operations side. The budget has improvements in the educational program for students, and we're really proud that we have been able to continue to implement these items at costs lower than what were described to the public during the referendum process. Later on tonight, we are asking, as Peggy mentioned, for approval of the 3rd draft of the budget. The next steps would include that document being brought forward to the public at the annual meeting process in October, and then we would request revisions of those documents as information like the student count, like the property values, and the final state aid is provided to the district this fall. We would bring that information forward to the board for consideration at the end of the month of October. And I know during the public comments portion, anybody who would like to ask any questions or make any comments on the budget process would be more than willing to do so.
Thank you, Steve.
Should we ask questions now, or do you want to wait until later in the agenda when we go over it?
Let's move on to the public comments, in case there's public comments, and then if we have other comments, we can discuss that when we take action. Thank you, Steve. Okay, item 8, public comments. Anybody present have any comments on tonight's agenda items? Hearing none, then we'll move on to item 9, administrative reports, starting with board reports. Any individuals are there any who would like to share items that they might have attended or sessions they might have attended with other members of the board? I guess the only thing that I'd like to mention is I took the opportunity to attend the ESSA listening session held on June 28th at DPI. And I'd like to bring everyone's attention to the DPI website and the fact that there are a variety of ways that you can learn more about the ESSA regulations. ESSA is the reauthorization of of ESEA, which is the federal school public education law. Each state has the ability to make some state-level changes. These listening sessions are intended to solicit input from members of the public, and there is a 60-day public comment period from May 31st through August 1st. So I'd encourage anybody who's interested in what might be coming to the state or have influence on what the state might be doing in terms of implementing ESSA in Wisconsin to take a look at the information on the DPI website and take advantage of the opportunity to provide input. The listening session that I had attended was basically one other opportunity to provide input. And I believe that others may be going to some future listening sessions as well at the district. So, okay, seeing that there's no other individuals interested in sharing, I'd like to go on to item number 2, board and superintendent evaluation process. First of all, you'll see in the HR meeting minutes that were in your packet that the HR committee discussed the desire that the board had expressed to update our superintendent evaluation process in 2017. And one of the things that the committee wanted to do is, well, first of all, recognize that the development of any new process is going to be a collaborative effort of the full board. There's also an interest in working with a consultant at some point to guide this process. One person that we've worked with in the past would be Lou Birchbauer. Possibly could reach out to him, but also I believe John Bales from WASB is also somebody. I spoke with him actually at the listening session. So there's 2 individuals who might want to kind of reach out and say, hey, what are your thoughts and what would you be interested in helping us out in terms of facilitating this process here. One of the other things that came out at our meeting, though, was the desire to have all board members and Randy also to provide input into the superintendent evaluation. So at the front of basically at your spots tonight, is a copy of a questionnaire, a little bit of background statement, which we'd like all board members to read the materials and answer a few basic questions with respect to our current process, because we believe that this is going to lead to a better understanding of what current beliefs and expectations of everybody around the table is, and to help guide and inform some of our next steps. So what you see in this packet is a cover page with 5 simple questions, open-ended questions. The first attachment is a copy of the Department of Public Instruction Wisconsin Content Guidelines for Superintendent Licensure Programs. What these represent are those competencies which superintendents have to, and programs that teach superintendents to become and license them. These are the guidelines that they are required to provide. And so Randy needs to have competency in all of these areas. They're typically called ISLIC standards for those who are in the business as well. But this provides a framework for what is expected at the state level in terms of the responsibilities of a superintendent. Next item is a sample, is a copy of a presentation from January of 2013 on superintendent evaluation that was at a WASB state conference, which was provided an overview of our roles, responsibilities, etc. The third thing is a copy of Randy's job description. And then the fourth one is a sample of what the tool is that we're using currently. So those are intended just to provide some background and reference information to help you to answer 5 questions that you see on the front top page. What the committee is asking everyone to do is to answer those questions and send their responses to Rebecca no later than we'll figure out what the time will be. So that then at a future HR meeting, we can take a look at the responses and see what everybody happens to be saying just kind of at this stage, and then that'll help guide us towards our future discussions with a potential consultant that we'll bring in to facilitate the process. Any questions, first of all, on the stuff? Yes?
Peg, do you have access to some of the commentary following the last evaluation we did? Because I know that was, in terms of using this, I think this was a tool we used.
Mhm.
I thought we had a discussion, and a lot of us, some of us shared some of the frustrating points in going through that.
Yes, I mean, that can certainly be also provided. Didn't want to kind of
I mean, I don't think we need it, but I think if the committee saw that, that
Oh,
would
I
be
see what you
helpful.
mean. Okay, yes. Okay. That's a committee discussion from our last one.
Mhm. And actually, if it wouldn't be too hard, I wouldn't mind getting a copy of that, just to review some of the thoughts we had at that time.
The
I don't know if that's
summary
asking
of
too
the-
much.
Yeah, exactly, right,
Yeah.
kind of a summary. In fact, I'm thinking that, if I remember, I have to take a look. I mean, basically, I can provide a copy, and Rebecca might actually have that. You could forward a copy of the completed evaluation, right? Is that what you're looking for, or our?
More a
kind of
response to it, I thought. I
What
thought we
think
had a,
Mark's talking about is during the process, we discussed, as we were leading up to
Yes.
discussing wanting to redo the evaluation process,
Right.
there was some feedback given about what we
Pluses,
liked or
minuses.
Okay,
disliked
yeah, we
about
got that.
this.
But it's actually, I think it's gonna be a combination of both of our meetings, but
Okay.
I'll just double check. That's available, that'll make
if
sure.
it's available, I don't know
Oh,
if
it is
is.
available
Okay.
because we've used that at our evaluation meetings, so it is a document that's up there. Okay? Any, I guess, comments? How about from the HR committee and all? Would you like to add a few thoughts?
No, we can do that.
We just felt that was important to move this forward because if we don't start working on it now, all of a sudden it's gonna be the fall, we're gonna be saying, let's do the same thing. It's just gonna continue.
Do we want to put our dates in here?
Yeah, we're going to figure that out as soon as. Joan, did you have a question?
The job description. This, so this 6-page document, is that's in policy?
If you go to our policies on the website, there is a section, you have policy section 100, series 100, all the way through 900, and at the end of that are job descriptions. So they appear in there, and there's actually job descriptions for all positions. So if anybody's ever interested in what the job descriptions are, they're on, you go to the policy section on the website, school board website, and it's on the bottom of, after all the series. And so you will see that the job description looks very much like what our evaluation is. And that's why the evaluation looks like the way it does.
Kind of puts those two pieces together.
Julie?
I guess I'll just say I'm really glad that we're doing something more concrete to move forward with it, because I've shared your frustration over the years with every year we complain about what we're currently doing, and then we never seem to move off the dime to move it forward. As the person in charge of goals committee or strategic plan, however we want to reframe that, I'll just iterate again. I hope we can integrate all of these different processes so that when we're setting a strategic plan and setting goals for ourselves and goals for Randy, somehow then that's reflected in our evaluations. So I would hope the strategic planning process gives us some long-range measures and some short-range measures, and that when we do these evaluation processes, we're actually holding each other accountable for,
Yep.
have we moved the needle of what we said was going to be our focus, or have we not? So to the extent that the tool can help us do that, I mean, I guess that's the hope, but it's back to another one of these chicken and the egg things. Can we make the process help us do it without the tool, or can we come up with the tool before we even know? You know, I'm glad we're moving forward. I think the 5 questions you've asked of us are good places to start.
And then also remembering that there are certain things which guide why we do and how we do what we do. And that's why when you bring somebody in from the outside, it's like, okay, we can follow the rules that we are held accountable for, but also make the process work for us, as opposed to, that there's a little bit more flexibility there that I think that we might have given ourselves the ability to do in the past. Okay, so the question is, how long does everybody think they'd like to have to get their responses to Rebecca by? I mean, our next HR committee meeting is actually, I think, August 2nd. And that's how many weeks from now?
3.
I mean, would 3 weeks be, I don't know anybody's personal schedules, I would put.
If you had it by the 29th, you could bring it to the HR committee. So that's,
Okay, it's Friday the 29th, Friday the 29th, is it? Okay.
I think you should say Wednesday the 27th, because that gives you a couple of days to coordinate and pull it together and to nag at the people who haven't done it. If you actually want it all on the 29th.
Well, actually, what I'm hoping can happen is that it all just goes to Rebecca, who will then forward, I mean, basically, you know.
You get to nag us individually.
Hey, Rebecca.
Heads up, so
I mean,
this is
if that's
coming.
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's another way to do it. That's
Well,
fine.
and actually, I shouldn't be the one who's compiling it.
Needs
I
a
mean, this is
taser
something
wrap.
which the committee is intending to do, so.
27th, is that what you said?
Okay, so how does Wednesday, the 27th sound, for getting answers to the 5 questions to Rebecca?
Great.
Wonderful. Okay, so that's the superintendent evaluation piece. The other piece that I would like to touch base with, because we said in our board governance, one of our board governance goals was to have some kind of a recommendation by this meeting as to what we wanted to do with our self-evaluation. And basically, I contacted WASB and actually specifically Lou Birchbauer and asked if they were going to be offering that survey that we've done in the past again. It will be offered again. He can't say for sure if it's going to be free because WASB has not made the decision on that, but it would, if they charge anything, it would be no more than $250, but I'm not even sure if there's going to be a fee for it. So my question for everyone here is, would it be okay, or actually my request is, can we just repeat the tool that we used for our self-evaluation again next year? If there's a nominal fee, we'll pay the fee. But that will enable us to move forward with the process that we used last year for our board governance goals, focus on what we need to do on the superintendent side, and basically use that for next year for our own process. It would cost too much to bring it in-house. I mean, $250 is not that much if there's a fee for it.
I think it makes sense to do it that way.
Okay, so what we'll do is wait to see what they say in terms of offering it for free.
I do like those wrap-up questions we did at the end, though, too.
Yes, okay.
That little
okay.
one page
So, so school perceptions plus wrap up. Wonderful. Okay, so that's it on evaluations process for this year. Thank you, everyone, appreciate it. Okay, community engagement discussion.
All right, moving on. This is one part of our strategic planning initiative, and one of the items on there is our community engagement discussion. As I shared with you previously, last month we talked about how our community has articulated to us how they want to receive information, and then we had a dialogue around how we feel that what that information is telling us. Tonight, really, what I want to talk about is who does that communication go to? I use the word communication and engagement, I think, interchangeably, so that can be, in different situations, can really mean both things and should mean both things. When we met with the school board, the administration, and our teacher leadership team met this winter, one of the groups that met with me to talk about internal and external stakeholders. And that's really the very simple notes that you have in your board packet tonight just shows you really some of the dialogue that came out of there. As we talked about the different members of the community, groups in the community, parts of the community that we, as a school district, felt that we either are communicating with, need to communicate with, or should be communicating with. So that list really doesn't have any prioritization to it. It's really meant as part of a brainstorming exercise. But as I looked through the process that I wanted to walk through with putting together the plan for us moving forward, I'm looking at some of the information from the Wisconsin School Public Relations Group. They're also recommending that as we put together a plan for how we can improve in this area, you can't write down 30 different community groups and then have a plan for each one. We're already communicating with many of these groups as part of our work, but part of what our effort should be as we look at the next 12 months, I would say, is to identify those groups that we feel that we either want to put a greater emphasis on or that we want to improve upon how we are engaging or communicating with them. So to really steer our conversation tonight, I really wanted to I posed 5 questions just for us to take a few minutes to discuss. As a follow-up to this, as to Rebecca will be taking notes tonight and then compiling those as well, I'll be putting together some sort of follow-up communication with you, a survey of some sort, just to gather some additional information prior to us really presenting a draft of a engagement plan for the next 12 months to the board in August. But to start off with, as you look at the list that we compiled with our leadership team, is there anything that you see as a glaring omission? I think that's an important question. And they covered a lot of ground. I think they hit most of them, but I thought we should start off with, is there anything that you felt that was amiss?
I didn't understand how they were defining internal publics and
Great.
external publics. So,
Yeah.
because to me, internal publics would be like teachers, parents, staff,
Right.
somebody with a direct connection to the school.
Right. And some of that got gray.
Okay.
But that's exactly right. Internal was anyone who had a direct connection to the school, was anybody who was working in the school, interacting with the school, or part of regular communication out of the school. So a parent who's receiving Infinite Campus messages, those receiving newsletters, that's really your internal folks. The external folks are the folks that don't have a direct connection to the school. So that was internal and external, and it got gray on some of those. And that was a discussion we had at our small group breakout, was a few areas of trying to really define really what that was more. And instead of trying to get into the whole semantics of it, I just listed them the way they were discussed, and then I can break them out as we go forward. But yeah, there's some gray to that, but as you defined it, that's exactly what internal was viewed.
So given that, I would
Yeah.
say we are weaker with our communications with the external public than we are with internal. So anything we can do to reach out to people who don't have kids or grandkids going to the school district
Okay.
as students, for example, I mean, just general taxpayers. Senior citizens are part of that, young singles are part of that.
Yep.
And probably the business community as well. Now, I think we've improved on that some, in the Fab Lab initiatives and things will help with that, but better dialogue between the business community.
I don't see your service clubs on here.
Okay. I think some of them were listed just individually, but you're right, there's, as a general sense of looking at what all the service clubs.
Okay.
I didn't see local municipal leaders and organizations.
Mm.
It was more, it's like county and state, but
Sure.
those
Good.
organizations would include like police, fire, EMT,
Yep.
other. One other one that I was wondering, we've talked about, if we could consider will be recent graduates.
Yep.
Oh, excellent.
Yep.
And then another one would be foundations,
Yep.
in terms of some that we're missing from
Okay.
either of the groups.
And we said business people in general, but I think more specifically, and I know we do some of this, real estate people, clearly.
Any others that you see as, that you don't see reflected in the notes? I have service clubs, local municipal leaders, recent graduates, foundations, real estate professionals.
It's a big group.
Yeah, it is. So my next question is, of our stakeholder groups that we have out there, who do you think we do a good job communicating with? Part of the impetus there is seeing who are we already addressing and what are some of our strategies that have been effective there. So who are some groups that you feel that we do a good job with?
Parents, infant and kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That,
Yes, I see that.
it's good for giving information,
Mhm.
but it isn't really good for a dialogue.
Good
No.
point.
So, it depends how you define engagement.
I would agree. And when you have 4 kids in school, infinite campus can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Sure does. But yes.
And I'm glad you said that, Joan,
Yeah.
because it's like communication versus engagement.
That's right.
Correct.
That's right.
And
Well, we're good at
Whatever our goal is.
disseminating
Yep.
information, but
Right.
soliciting feedback, I think, is what we don't have a good avenue or a good vehicle to get information back.
Other ones you think we do a good job with?
I think we do a good job in general with teachers. I mean, there's a lot, or,
Yes.
staff.
We do.
And I say some employees, I mean, but I think that there's so many different ways that I believe we've tried to make available for input and feedback from staff.
And that's a true engagement, because they get to, with Randy's, you do those monthly meetings, our
Yes,
listening sessions.
the budget meetings in the spring.
Yeah.
Any other ones?
I think we actually do, I'd say an outstanding job with engaging dialogue, and whether it's the PTO groups, the advisory boards. I think at every level, building level, there's a forum that there is a two-way communication opportunity.
And when you say advisory boards, like some of those that are ongoing or even ad hoc, either way.
Right.
Wish we could encourage more people to take advantage of those opportunities,
Right.
because sometimes you get the same 3 people over and over again. But
I think the Tribune is one that wherever he went, I like to give him a, hey, cheers.
We got Roger and
Well, between,
We're in there, we need to add Pete.
between, exactly, I mean, we've got
He's
3
right.
great.
Gave him accolades and you left.
Yep.
Yeah,
you-
and
you
including
excluded
Roger.
his
in
name,
that
he
one,
left.
yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I have parents with regards to dissemination, teachers and staff, PTO advisory and advisory type groups at the schools, the Tribune, across the board with Pete, Roger, Roberta.
The parents was the first one.
Yep. Parents.
Some service organizations, I think. I mean, we have representation. Some representation, I think whenever, I mean, like, you are on the Rotary, and, I think as we tend to each be involved in different groups ourselves, so to the extent we use those opportunities, or we make ourselves available, I get questions,
Right. Moving on, which ones do you perceive that we aren't as effective as we could be? So some areas that we would have for improvement.
echoing what Julie said
Mhm.
earlier, those without children.
Mhm.
But I think what you said was external public, seniors, business community, singles, those that don't have kids directly involved with the school. Okay.
It also suggests those families from a lower econ level who are, whether they're more permanent or transient, I think both groups may lack access, whether it's due to language barriers or technology barriers. I mean, I do know that at the elementary levels, at least, there's a strong, connection with the social workers, with the families. But I'm certain that still people are lost with communication.
I guess then piggybacking on that is whether or not we should be also looking at, other service organizations. I think we talked about it, like even WNC, or social workers, is there a group of people that we can be linking up with that will help us increase access to a wider range of families who maybe need one reaching out?
So are you thinking about groups outside of Waunakee?
No, within
The
Waunakee.
WMC is statewide.
Well, the Waunakee Neighborhood Connection, I was thinking.
Oh, Waunakee neighborhood.
Connection, yeah. That-
I think when you take a look at some of the pieces, like with the groups that Mark was talking about, our social workers tie in pretty tightly with them and then help to get them to some of those agencies like WNC, St. Vinny's Goodwill, some of those, and then the county social workers. But I think one of the pieces to your point is communication with them
Right.
and working with them are different, in my
Mhm.
opinion. I mean, I
Mhm.
think we found that when we did our linkage meeting with some of the families we invited, the extra steps we went to in putting their invitation letters in their home language, some of those pieces were helpful in
Mhm.
engaging them, having.
And then having a translator at the meeting
Right.
with them.
But in the absence of doing that, we wouldn't have had that dialogue, and they provided some pretty insightful information. Any other groups that come to mind as you're just perusing this?
I guess depending on what our goal is, what about students? We have a statement each month, and we have student representatives from the high school. But I know of some districts that have more active student enrollment on either boards or committees or things like that. Just a thought.
I don't think we tap into their input near enough, so I would echo that.
Depends on what we're
Yeah.
seeking.
Yeah. Which really leads to our fourth question, which if we can just flush out a little bit tonight, and this will be part of what I'll follow up with you on separately then, is trying to put together then the plan for this, for engagement communication. Are there 3 to 5 different areas that we should be focusing on? Now, you may have already identified those with areas that we can improve upon. So what we listed so far as areas for improvement were some of our external publics, as Julie had articulated, the seniors, business community, singles, or those who don't have a direct connection, lower economic transient populations, ELL families. We talked about other social service agencies. I think we have some connections, but that'd be a good one for me just to follow up and see what kind of communications we have there. I think students in general, I think was your point, Peggy. So that gives us 3 or 4. There are other ones that if you were looking at trying to just make sure that we have included in this plan, that we have as a target audience to improve upon what we're doing, that you would identify. Dave, did I see your hand? I'm sorry.
The only thing I'm thinking of is we're identifying who we want to talk to, but we're not identifying what we're going to talk about.
Right.
Because these different groups you're listing are going to have different reasons for
Right.
wanting to talk about the
That's
school.
right.
There
That's
is
right.
no one topic that every one of those groups is
No.
going to be interested in.
No.
And I think we need to understand there will be no engagement if they're not interested
Right.
in the topic.
Right. And so part of what we talked about last month was what were some of the topics that we felt that we were receiving some feedback on. So then I think then the dialogue has to be kind of where do you position those topics to have the discussion.
Yeah, I would echo Dave's thought that it, rather than targeting which groups we want to engage with, identifying what we want to engage about, and then trying to pull in people from those groups, but make the topic the focus,
Yep.
not the group.
Okay, all right.
I would really agree.
Yep.
So going back to what we talked about last month a bit, and targeting, so if we're looking at our plan moving forward,
Mhm.
targeting some of those key topics that we identified, and from there, then identifying, see, like,
And so as an example, if we were going to be if the drug issue is something of significance, we could still send an invite to different, to the senior center at the village building as an example, possibly to the residences. I mean, to pull some of those
Sure.
people, find a way to let those folks know that we're targeting, that they are invited too, not just parents of kids.
Sure.
To me, that'd be more authentic.
all right. It's helpful.
I had the same overall comment as Dave started articulating, is not so sure it's the who, but the what and the
Sure.
how. And then in terms of which groups, I turn to our vision statement. I mean, we say community, staff, parents, and students, and so maybe, depending on the what is the topic, there may be certain components or segments of, say, the community. I mean, is it the businesses or the organization side of things? And so, I mean, if we have stated that that's who we're kind of working with, is there a way to kind of align things with
Yep.
our statement, as well as the fact that it's really the what and how we want to be engaging with them? And perhaps maybe there's like, maybe in one sense, community, parents, and students are the focus of a targeted message about, the youth risk assessment and drugs and things like that, whereas then another item might be for staff and parents or whatever, so using those that we've articulated that we work in collaboration with.
I think that's a good point, and I think that can give us a direction of what the plan can be focused on topically. I do think there are, as we look through some of the stakeholder groups, there are a few that we miss. And I think we also need to make sure that we include that in there somewhere so we can start to look at our engagement with a broader range of groups as well. So I would offer that I think it's a little bit of both. That you have to have, there are some things that we need to be aware of who our public is, and there's some that we're missing. But I like what Dave and others have shared is trying to focus it in on the topic. We can build some of those things backwards, but we need to then make sure that there's some of our areas where we've missed included in that.
The other thing we can do too is be aware of that target group for some of the year-to-year things
Right.
that this fall we're going to be having an open house for the intermediate school for sure, and I don't know how we're going to integrate that with Heritage, but a special invite again to the seniors and the younger families, so that they know they're part of this as well. And it is they've contributed to that, to the success we've had with the building programs.
Good point.
Would make some sense.
To piggyback on what you just said, I've been, I remember when going through one of the tours of the facility, I was thinking exactly of the open house. I said the opportunity to use the open house and any visuals on, as part of a self-guided tour kind of thing, to be reinforcing some of the things that we have been developing as part of either strategic plan or did you know kinds of things all around. And why is the weight room that big? Well, because we're making it more than just serving the needs of Unit
Mhm.
schools. Things that would reflect not just the building, but how it's reflective of what we're about as a district.
Yep.
Or to acknowledge appreciation for the
And
support in all its
and
different
all of it,
forms, you
all of
know.
it. Yeah. All of it.
I think these are all very helpful comments that I can see how this starts to frame together as part of our plan for the next year. I think it will also give me a few follow-up questions that I'll have with you as I start to pull this together. So you can see, you'll see that in the next few weeks via email to you and just get a couple more feedback points from me before I put the plan together. But any final thoughts or anything else you'd like to share just as far as either the questions that we're talking about or some of just that topic of engagement in general?
I know one thing that we hear in different ways, sometimes during listening sessions, sometimes just out and about, from staff is, I'm sure part of this is promoting what we do, the whole concept of promoting, not just sharing a message, but we do some phenomenal things here, and always having something out there, which, and our goal with engagement is to motivate, persuade, and inspire people to want to be getting more involved.
Right.
And so, whatever we can be doing, either with conversations or whatever form of community engagement, it's really, we're trying to get people to do something and
Right.
think about us as something they want to be proud of and possibly more involved with, so. And I'm hoping that at some point it also changes the conversation and the priority and the agenda around this table, which I'm thinking is something we're all thinking about, is that the things we talk about are the things that are reflective of our strategic plan, so,
Yep.
and our vision.
Great.
Do we know what we want these people to do to get engaged? Obviously, with the innovation center, I think we've got specific asks, and these guys, most of the people that we talk to, are pretty excited about getting involved.
Mhm.
So, when we start looking at other topics or expanding the engagement, what do we want people to be engaged with? And then, if we do want them engaged, do we really want them engaged?
It's like,
Right.
ooh, we asked, and now.
Right.
Because you're probably going to get a lot of people that say, I want to get engaged. And if you don't have a path for them to get engaged, it's tough.
What I see with our planning process is I think this isn't going to be a kind of a one and done thing. It's a
Mhm.
continual process.
Mhm.
And I think that there are some approaches, some topics, some things that we want to be, I think we're starting off at a different level. Some of it is I think your point you just made about what do we want to promote, what are some of our celebrations, what's some of our data. We don't do a good job promoting that. So I think some of these are making sure we start to put in processes that does that. We start to look at a few of our groups that we just haven't targeted with our communication specifically, I think, as you pointed out. And I think as we then you have very specific projects like the Innovation Center, which is creating a whole different level of engagement. So I see us in the first year, this plan looking at trying to get some of those more sophisticated engagements continuing to move forward, but also finding ways where we can start to communicate and engage with folks that we traditionally haven't. And then I think that can lead to further dialogue about what does the more sophisticated engagement aspect look like. I think it's going to be a journey. That's gonna take that we just need to continue to keep our eye on. But I think as we look at it, as of today, we don't have a strategic approach for how we do our communication or engagement. We just go about it as the need fits, but it doesn't have a strategic aspect to it. And that's really what I want to try to focus on as we move forward. Thank you, that's very helpful. So I'll be following up with board members here in the next few weeks, and then we will bring another aspect of this to at least get your feedback on in August so we can start moving forward.
Okay, on to administrative reports, starting with curriculum presentation. Tim?
Our curriculum topic for this month is just to share a little bit with you about some of the placement tests that the UW system and Madison College use to place students into courses. Now, as a special bonus, because I knew that you all wanted this, you probably looked at it, Mark, too, didn't you?
Even the math one.
Even the math one.
Even the math
I
one.
tried to.
In fact, I practiced
didn't
it.
take the whole test, but I took a good part.
Yeah.
Okay.
My daughter and I had a competition.
Oh, that's cool.
So that wasn't.
I won
that's
math, she won
And
English.
we won't be, Rebecca asked me, she goes, do I need to have that teed up? And I said, no, that was just to illustrate. But I wanted that in there because we oftentimes talk about these scores in isolation. What are they really? And at least in the case of the UW system, they make the practice tests available. So that gives you a little bit of the flavor of kind of what this is derived from. But those of you who have recently gone through college or have kids that are recently in the college process know that, or other young people in your families know that the kids that go to most institutions of higher education take some kind of placement test above and beyond what they might take with us. And the results of those put them into different levels of English or math courses, sometimes world language courses, and in some cases, this is kind of the most critical aspect of the process. Sometimes a student can score at a level, even though they have been admitted to the institution and are going there in the fall, they can be placed into what used to be called remedial, now is sometimes being called developmental courses. And these are courses that students are taking, students are paying for, both in seat time and tuition, but these aren't credit-bearing courses. And typically this is more common in mathematics and English, but it can also happen in English. And these are for students who, through the placement process, score at a lower level. And we know a few things historically. We know historically that students who place into remedial courses have less successful outcomes, whether it's a 2-year or a 4-year college. They take longer to complete. It's more likely that they won't complete. Now, part of that may be a lower level of readiness for the college, which might very well be why they scored low on the placement process to begin with. But realistically, anything that kind of extends a student's time towards degree completion kind of has that outcome they're going to college for, and it's further away, can be demotivating to kids as well. Plus, finances matter for higher education. These are courses that they're paying for that don't really get them anyplace. So this is a topic that's of interest to us as a school district. It's of interest to institutions of higher education. I'm sure it comes up from time to time at Madison College board meetings. It's also a matter of concern for policymakers. So what I've done is provided some information here with you, but I really want to kind of talk more about the issues involved. I'm happy to kind of talk about this information. But the first thing to understand is there's no one single measure that's used, or the measure's not always used in the same way. Madison College is going through kind of a transition piece where they are starting to rely less on the Compass test, and they're beginning to look more at the ACT, because all juniors in Wisconsin take the ACT. By the same token, Madison College can't completely rely on the ACT because not all of the students who go to Madison College are traditional students by age. They may be a long ways from having had an ACT, and that's why they will use things like Compass or Act Replacer, so on and so forth. So even for Madison College, which is a single campus and kind of the cleanest, there are different factors that play into this. For the UW system, we have a report that we get on demand, and I'll talk more about UW reports a little later, but it presents a single picture of our students. And the important thing to understand is that the placement office for the UW system is providing this service for all of the 2-year and 4-year campuses in the system. Each campus sets its own placement criteria. And so I'm just going to quote from a 2013 remedial education report from UW system. There are no 2 campuses in the UW system that use the same method for determining placement into remedial math and English. Indeed, of the institutions that use the math placement and English placement test, none apply the same cutoff scores. According to the Center for Placement Testing, the variation among institutions is such that if the cutoff score for one of the comprehensive institutions was used to place all of the students who took the math placement test, about 4% of the incoming class would be required to take remedial math. If the cutoff score for another one of the comprehensive institutions was used, over 40% would be required to take remedial math. And then they conclude differences in institutional mission do not appear to explain this variance. So that's the other thing to remember when you see this. This is the Placement Center's best attempt to give us a single measure. But whether a student goes to Whitewater, Madison, Milwaukee, Green Bay, that score might mean a different thing, especially in math, depending on what institution they went to. So understand that we're still dealing with things at kind of a summary level. This is going to be an even more interesting conversation in September when for the first time by state law, UW System Administration is required to provide the legislature and DPI with a report, not quite this report, but a report that will detail for every high school in the state what percentage of students from that high school were placed into remedial courses. And that's, again, I look at that as useful information to us, but the legislature and DPI will see it before we will see it. And I'm going to be very interested to see if it actually gets down to more finer grained detail about, and obviously it can't be publicly reported, but for us, who are the kids, what are the campuses? Because knowing that there's that variance in placement scores, that makes a difference. So before I get into this, I just kind of want to say there is some complexity to this. And Mark, it looks like you have a question.
The question I had with the MATC scores, do they have the same cutoff standard for all programs as they do for the baccalaureate?
And the answer to that for placement is yes. So in terms of remedial.
Right,
So-
so you could be looking at a non-degree program, but you have to meet the same standard as a baccalaureate student.
Correct. And the significance is you might have a score that wouldn't place you into remedial, but the credit-bearing class it places you into might not fast-track you towards your credential. So
Right.
that's the other thing to kind of keep in mind here. So let's start with the Madison Area Technical College, and this is the spring 2015 results. And the reason for the lag is that because of the changes in state assessment, Madison College actually has a work group that they're going to convene in a little less than a month to look at what their options are for updating their placement criteria using different measures. They're going to have some collegiate people there. They're going to have some public school people there. I don't know if there are going to be other stakeholders involved. So this is the most recent. I mean, obviously their processes are ongoing, but they don't have a formal reporting process they want to put out. And what you'll see at first glance is, and this is true for remedial issues nationally, many more of our students place as non-prepared for math than they do for English. And this is true nationally, it's true if you look at the summary data for Madison College for all of the institutions, it's true for the UW data as well. You'll see that our 5-year average is 39.2% prepared versus 34.8% prepared for all of the high schools in the Madison College area. You also will notice that in 2014, over the 5-year period, we have a steadily declining trend of the number of kids who are, taking these courses, and our outcomes are getting better for math. And part of the issue with math, but not with English, is also as we've had kids begin to take the senior algebra course, which is articulated with Madison College, that's helping a bit with the remedial numbers for math. But you'll see, again, we compare well with the other regional districts, but we still have significant numbers of kids who are taking remedial courses. And so that's something where, again, we try to work with Madison College tries to work with us, better understanding of what the expectations are, and try to give students good advice about what they need to do in high school to get ready for the next level.
I had just kind of one data question,
Mhm.
because the report indicates direct from high school.
Yes.
Is that literally that year, or can somebody have chosen not to go to college for a few years and then decided, okay, I'm gonna start at the tech college level?
Mhm.
And the last high school they attended would have been, Waunakee or any other school. Is this the last, that technically is direct from high school? So-
They would not count,
Okay,
they would
so-
not count that as direct from high school by their meaning is
The following
without
fall.
really, right.
Okay, so
without-
which
Right.
like a majority of
Yeah.
the students might be from.
Right, so these are students that are going to Madison College
Right out of
pretty much following
Got it,
graduation.
okay.
The other thing we have here is the UW Center for Placement Testing. And again, they're serving multiple campuses, all doing their own thing. And so you'll see how they describe it here. They try to paint a single picture. 500 is the average score statewide. And so the first question we want to ask is, how does our average compare to the state average? And remember, there's a certain amount of sorting that's going on here. I mean, we like to think of ourselves as always being above the state average, but on any of these things, these institutions are doing some selection themselves to try to create more similar baskets of students. So we send more kids. The big difference between us and the state at large is we probably send more kids by percentage to UW system schools, but presumably the kids we send to UW system schools through the admissions process are broadly similar to the kids that are being admitted from other high schools in the state. So it's a little more apples to apples than if you're looking at a statewide DPI assessment. So what we look for is, are we at or above 500? And for most of our areas, we are significantly, for math mostly, but really for all the areas. French is just a little bit below, but they're very close to 500. So overall, from an average perspective, these look good, but we still know there's significant issues with the whole remedial thing. I think when those reports come out in the fall, that's going to be something that's going to prompt additional statewide discussion. Hopefully it's objective and positive and constructive and not kind of a finger-pointing exercise. But I just kind of wanted to share some of this with you and then just kind of open it up to any questions you have. One thing I will tell you is with Madison College, we do get individual student results back as part of this data sharing process. We do not from the UW system. We just get summary reports, at least for now. Mark?
Does METC provide data on how many students enter the remedial program and complete or don't complete a program?
They do. I don't have it here, but we can get that. It's the same thing broadly. It's the same thing for Madison College and other community colleges as with 4 years. Students who enter remedial education are
Less likely.
academically at risk.
Yep.
they tend to have lower persistence percentages and lower degree completion percentages. And sometimes they're correlating factors. So, you know, for instance, a student, whether they're in a community college like Madison College or in a four-year like say Madison or Platteville, students in who are placed into remedial courses are disproportionately compared to the general population receiving Pell Grants, for example, as part of student aid. So it's not only an academic factor, there's social capital, there's access to outside resources to help you go through the collegiate experience.
I guess my question would be, then follow-up question would be, given the numbers we have, would there be anything that we could do to intervene to try to make those students more successful? I mean, you're looking at 35-some students on average, which is it doesn't sound like a lot with the graduating class of 250, 300, but it's still 35 kids who potentially may never finish their program.
There are a few different things. I mean, the first is just to kind of improve outcomes for all of our kids generally. If we look at who our lowest performing students are and try to improve what they have coming through our system, that will benefit them here. That's not very targeted, that's kind of a general improvement strategy. You know, one of the things Madison College is really looking at now is setting clear criteria for ACT. And we give the ACT to all juniors. And as part of the state assessment system, we give Aspire in 9th and 10th grade that's linked up to ACT. So in principle, we should be able to walk backwards from ACT's placement target and be able to say to a student who, when we get our, 9th grade Aspire results back in a few weeks, say if you're looking at Madison College, this is an on-track number for not being in remedial courses. We don't have that now because Madison College is still working towards that target, but if they did, we could provide better information. And then I think, the other thing is, as part of academic and career planning, getting into conversations early with students, what do you really want to do? And then, again, that's a two-way street. The student has to help us by having something of a concept of where they want to be in a few years. But then really having an objective conversation about, are you on track academically for that? What courses should you be taking? If we have, we're not there yet, Mark, but if we have a student who says they want to go to Madison College, we don't think they're we think there's a great likelihood that whenever they go through the placement process, it'd be placed in remedial. Maybe that's something we do with student contact time and have skill developers. Maybe we look at, we haven't brought in the dual credit course in English that's like the dual credit course in math, senior algebra. That could be another thing we could look at. I mean, again, our English outcomes are better than our math outcomes, so I almost kind of want to focus a little more on math than English, but that's still an issue too.
Okay.
Julie?
Well, I was curious too, when I attended that ACT conference a couple of years ago, they were talking about a program that I believe it was UW La Crosse had launched.
Yes.
That you could do an assessment with the math portion at the beginning of the summer, and then there was an online course that would help catch you up. And what I liked hearing about that program in particular is it would isolate different skill sets that you were deficient in. So you could pass parts of it and say, you did all this great, but you need to bring up this component of it. And then there was a way to drill and practice and retest and become successful. So are we making students aware of those kinds of opportunities? These placement tests, if you're on the ball and you're smart enough, you can take them as early as, I think, April and May. I mean, some of them. So you would have time to recover and do that.
You would, and, again, that's a great, I'm glad you brought that up. That was an interesting presentation they had that day. And, this is a big topic, and really, it's everybody's problem. It's not only our issue. And, I mean, one thing colleges and universities need to look at is what information do they give us in high schools, and also what kind of bridge programs they
That-
offer for
that's-
kids.
that's what I'm
And the great
saying.
thing about what UW La Crosse was doing is they had a nice summer program, part of it face-to-face, part of it online.
Yeah.
That from my perspective was very early and very kid-friendly. So a kid had to spend summertime on it, but if they were successful in that, they had the opportunity to start on track in September.
Exactly.
Which I think is really important. Now, for the UW system, they have, and we use this for math, they have early placement tests. They don't count, but they're kind of early versions that kids can take sophomore or junior year that are aligned with the placement tests, kind of like the practice tests you all had the chance to see. And students can take those and they can see where they placed, how that aligned to different intended majors at different UW campuses. And then the math department says, if you want to come talk to me about your score, you know, come talk, we'll go over it. And we get that information out to all of our kids in the fall. And again, for the student who's, as a sophomore or junior, is really geared into this, they have a chance for that calibration in their mind, oh, I need to maybe do something differently in math.
I just am thinking, you know, that's how young people's brains work. It's not a real problem until it's hitting them in the face.
Yes.
So, but even once they've taken these placement tests, that's what I liked about that opportunity. I don't know how we get the word out about the availability of that, because it was my understanding too, though La Crosse was launching it, they were opening it up and you did not have to be La Crosse bound or La Crosse enrolled in order to take advantage of it. So it could help other kids as well.
It could, and we haven't really heard anything about that lacrosse program that's been pushed to us subsequently. I don't know if it's going on, you know, or not. It's certainly something we can try to check back with them and see if they are making it available to kids in high school. Any other questions? When we do get that report in the fall, whatever, you know, shape it takes, we'll be bringing that back. If it's a September 1 report, we might get it into the September board meeting. I would expect it certainly by the October board meeting. So we'll come at this with a little more of a UW-specific take in the fall. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is approval of the student-teacher co-curricular special ed handbooks, which were all provided for review and in board book as separate attachments, and the summaries were in our board book document separately. They're not guidelines, but are operational handbooks that cover day-to-day procedural things. We are required to approve, basically because it states in our policy. Do you have any statements? on that?
Yeah, just to note that these are different than our employee guidelines, which are on later on in the agenda. And these are items that are from the principals go through and take a look at their handbooks, look at updates to policies, updates to procedures that they're doing within their buildings. Co-curricular handbook is also included in there, which I believe Aaron is going to take some time next year to do a more thorough review of. But I don't think he has any changes to it for this year. So the memos, as Peggy articulated, are part of the regular agenda that are just summaries. And then the actual documents were in your extras tab of board book. So these are things that come before you on an annual basis, and then they will be part of our registration process when we're working with our families come August.
Okay, so what we're seeking is a motion to approve of that, and we can have some discussion after the motion is made.
Move approval of handbooks.
Second.
Second by Gary, first by Joan. Any discussion or questions on all the handbooks? I do appreciate that there's kind of one consolidated one for the elementaries and intermediate. Okay, hearing none. Motion's on the table. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Great, thank you.
Finance reports. Steve?
Thank you, Megan. You made it past all of the practice tests, way down on page 101. You'll find the typical monthly financial reports. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have had in those documents.
Okay, one minor question. On page 126 under the food service, now that we had all this big change going away from the federal guidelines, I just noticed, and it was actually in the second draft, I should have noticed it then, but why did we drop $55,000 in utility charges, and where did that go? Because the utility charges would still exist. We must have moved them somewhere.
Sure, so your question's about the third draft of the budget. With the utilities, a decision was made to shift all of the food service utilities back to the district and off of food service. So those will be reflected in the Fund 10 utility budgets. The reason for that was twofold. Number one, there has been more of an effort, even though we're not going to be in the USD program, to have those type of costs move off of programs like food service, and so there's been a trend to get that stuff out of food service funds. And the second one was just to limit the increase in the lunch costs. As the committee looked at that, there was a concern that the costs would have had to be higher than we would have liked them to do. And with the positive news that in the referendum with the geothermal system at the intermediate school, the savings were pretty significant from what we had been estimating the utility costs might be. Because when we were doing the estimates, we didn't know we were going to put in the geothermal system. There were the funds available within the utility budget to make that transfer. So it's a couple of different reasons why it was made, but I would say primarily due to the concern about the cost of the lunch being too high.
So I don't disagree with doing that, but I do think it is an important side effect of the fact that moving off the USDA, we are having to absorb some costs about it, and we couldn't, it's not a break-even point. We do lose money by moving off the USDA. I still think it's a better idea because I think more kids and stuff will be more involved in the food program instead of skipping it, like my daughter. But I think we just have to understand that that was a lot of money that moved there, basically, instead of the feds and stuff picking up some of that, we're going to pick it up ourselves, but hopefully in the long run it'll balance out better. But that was in effect $55,000 we just decided to start paying.
Right, absolutely, that was correct.
My other question was, you were talking about earlier the
Is
gain.
this in the budget?
Yes.
Okay, just need, first of all, we need approval on the monthly finance reports, and then we'll move to the budget.
Oh.
And I had a question on that, on the monthly finance reports. So this is effective as of June 30th, 2016. Does this close out the 15-16 school year then?
Sure, great question. So we still have a number of bills that have not been paid. So a good example is we received quite a few invoices around the 15th through the 20th of the month that still belong to June. So we have a number of invoices yet that still have to be paid. We still have quite a few end of the year accounting transactions that need to be filed. So we still do have quite a bit that needs to be done. The salary and benefits is mostly done, but there still is quite a few transactions that we need to complete.
I was just curious in terms of the individual department and building budgets and the carryover balances. So these are still, the carryover balance listed is still the balance or the negative balance from the previous school year, meaning 14-15.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so those two numbers are not going to be merged until next
So
month?
They will probably be merged once the audit process has been completed. The auditors are coming the second week in August. And so the process will be completed once they're done. So I would say it'll probably take till the middle of August for everything to be completed, and then they'll be merged in September.
Okay, so you mentioned some of these, there are like invoices waiting to be paid. Would most of those be accounted for in the ordered column? Or?
I would say yes, that is accurate. The majority of them would be accounted for in the ordered column, meaning purchase orders have been issued, but the invoices have not been paid. Yes, that would be correct.
Okay, so I will just use this opportunity again to state what I noticed as a very positive thing in terms of the athletic budget, which the previous year was carrying over a negative budget, and it appears to me that though we didn't expand that budget, I don't believe, there is a significantly larger positive balance. And so commendations to Aaron and the way he's budgeted his first year of budget with that athletic area. I think he's done a great job by the looks of it.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other comments on the monthly budget, monthly reports, finance reports? We are looking for approval then of the monthly finance reports as presented. Is there a motion to approve of it?
I so move.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Announcements? Of course, because then we'll go to the budget committee. Oh, coming up to it. Okay, okay, the only announcement is that we, both Randy and I, and it's also available on the website, is that the resolutions that were adopted by the Delegate Assembly in 2016 have been incorporated into a document which is on the WASB website called Resolutions Adopted by Delegate Assemblies. And what this does is compile all of the recently approved ones into all of the formerly approved ones into a document. This is what I'll be looking at as kind of sample language, by the way, for the resolution that we might want to consider writing for a submission for this year's Delegate Assembly. So I just want to bring this to the attention of everybody. If this is something that you'd like to have a hard copy made available in that cabinet down there, we can certainly put one there, but it's also available online. Okay, now on to the Budget Committee.
So the budget committee met tonight prior to the regular monthly board meeting. There are a couple of agenda items. The one that you see in front of you is approval of the third draft of the budget. In your board book notes, I did identify 6 changes that took place between the second draft of the budget and the third draft of the budget. The most significant of those changes were item number 4, which is an update to state equalization aid and property taxes based on July 1st DPI state aid estimate. The positive news is the state aid estimate was a little bit higher than what we were estimating. So the property tax increase that is estimated for the fall declined slightly from the previous draft of the previous draft that you have seen. And then there were a few other changes that we reviewed with the budget committee. The budget committee did make a motion to recommend approval of the third draft of the budget at tonight's meeting. And like I mentioned previously, if approved, it would be carried forward to October when the community has the annual meeting during the month of October, and then revised at the end of the month. Dave, I appreciate your eagerness to jump into questions, so I'm ready. Any questions?
I've been waiting all week for this question, because when I saw the legislative stuff about this, I knew this was gonna come around. So, now that the state is saying there's this extra, and ours was 700,000, I believe, somewhere in that range, does that then reduce the property tax assessment in the district?
Yeah, so Dave's question is when the state equalization aid amount increases, and those information was reported in many major media outlets about a week and a half ago. The answer is yes, that directly impacts the property tax levy. It's not funds that the public schools can actually expend. So when there's increases in state equalization aid under the revenue cap formula, the property tax levy is pushed down. So because the revenue cap increase for public schools was 0 in the state budget, we were not able to increase the amount of spending that actually could occur other than growth in our student population. So the student population affects the formula, but as you noted, Dave, yes, absolutely, that's correct. If there's an increase in the state equalization aid, it's not funds that can be expended by a public school, it just lowers the tax levy, which of course is positive news for taxpayers, but in the end, it's not dollars that are available to spend at the local school level.
The only way we get new funds is if the revenue cap goes up.
So,
You asked about the assessment.
Yeah, so this is the weird thing, is, and I think this is what causes the confusion, is people say, well, the schools gained $700,000. No, we didn't. The school district gained absolutely zero. So there's not a single extra dollar in the school district. But what happens is, in effect, what did the state just do? They just gave a tax cut. They took $700,000, said they gave it to the school, then told the school, you will reduce how much you are taxing by $700,000. So people got a property tax cut, the school got zero, and then the state gave out a tax cut. And in effect, they just ran it through and made it look like the schools
being
gained
generous.
money. So in a weird way, we get told you gained money, people get the property tax cut, the state gives it to them, and somehow we're expected to do the same this year with what we had last year. Yet they get to pretend they gave us more money.
Right.
And I think that's the shell game that people don't understand. And I'm never against a property tax cut because I pay property taxes. But again, it's the school districts having to do this year with the same amount of money they had last year, even though we all know there's some small inflation that hit us anyway.
Right, if the revenue cap increase was not zero, it would be a different situation. So if the revenue cap went up $100 or $200, then those would be funds that actually could be expended by schools. And then the mix would be a combination of state aid and property taxes. But when the revenue cap formula is limited to zero, then funds that are provided to schools through the equalization aid formula are directly used to reduce the property tax levy. So it's a great point that it could appear, at least to the general public, reading a press release on additional funds being provided, that those are funds that can be turned around and used by the local public school, when in effect that's not correct, because the revenue cap increase in the state budget was zero, which would not allow those funds to then turn around and be expended.
Okay, Principal Mark?
Might that be a communication, educational snippet that ought to go into the Waunakee Tribune? I know when I read the State Journal and saw how much the school district got, I was excited about that. I'm sure most citizens were excited about that, but thank you for the articulation.
Yes.
But that's something that I think Waunakee citizens need to hear.
And this is something we've seen for a number of years.
Sure.
Is we've seen an articulation that K-12 education is receiving X amount additional in state aid, when in essence, without touching the revenue cap, it doesn't give us $1 more to spend on students.
Right.
Gary?
But it fits into the formula. The formula basically is the school spends so much. You get revenue cap money, you get tax money from the property taxes. So in this case, they gave it back to the property taxes. If we spend more than the revenue cap that we receive, then that comes out of the property taxes, correct? Am I kind of advancing my numbers here?
It would if there was a revenue cap.
So we're fortunate in that we got something back on the property tax side, so that you have room if you did spend more and do something, it would come out of property taxes, or could be in that thing. We're fortunate in that we got something. Think of a district that didn't. They didn't get that side of it, plus they didn't get a revenue cap increase.
Right.
I'm just trying to think through
Yeah,
this.
right.
When
Oh, yeah,
you're thinking
right,
right.
there's
It could be worse.
One factor into this, it is not perceived correctly, and when it's stated that way, I get that. But I'm just trying to think the net effect on
Well,
it.
you're right.
Other ones, you had some other districts that went
Had a
down.
negative, yep.
So they aren't getting the property tax break, and if the revenue cap didn't increase, which it didn't, now if they have extra school revenue they need, their property taxes are going up.
Yeah,
Right.
property owners, though, enjoyed the benefit, not the school district.
So, but property owners are also the other ones that pay the half.
I think the simplest way to look at this was a property tax cut given by the state that is fine, but they try to make it look like they gave extra money to the schools at the same time.
Which they did.
Yet that didn't happen. They could have simply taken this money, given a property tax cut across the state, and said, here you go, we're doing a property tax cut. But instead, they wanted the extra press of saying, we gave more money to the
To public
schools.
To me, the better
Yet
way
it
to do
didn't
that
happen.
would be they increase the revenue cap. then they're giving the schools more money to do stuff on the
Right.
skate park.
Correct.
Right.
Or if they gave you the money, this
They gave
$700,000
zero.
and say,
If they gave it to the revenue cap,
you
that would
don't
be
have
another way of
to.
saying it this way, they're giving it back to the property
Right.
tax. If you go over the property tax first and take care of it.
Yeah.
I don't know their reasoning or what they're doing, but the net effect is property tax people pay the bill. So it's, you're giving it back one way or the other.
Steve, I have one question. When individuals get their tax bill and says school levy tax credit, is this at all reflective of that, or is that another source of money that is coming, it's being perceived as going to schools when it's not really?
Right, that's a great question.
This is different, I
School
think.
tax levy credit is different, and it's a very large amount of dollars that we don't see anywhere in our process. It is called at the state level school funding, although it really is just a direct credit. If everybody looks at their property tax bills, they'll see it on there. But it is called school funding, and in the past, when increases have been provided to the school tax levy credit, it's been counted at the state budget process as school funding, when
But
it
it never came
truly
to
is
schools.
not.
That's why it's so scary when you see that school funding has decreased, yet they've been increasingly using these two methods to make it look like they're putting more money in. It'd be kind of more fun to go in and look, how much has it really decreased when you quit trying to double count the same amount of money? Saying it's a property tax relief and it's school funding.
to school
It can't
funding.
be both.
Yeah.
But that's what they've been counting it as. So that whole, what was it, 50% was what the legislature said they were gonna fund public schools, and they're way, way, way below that number every year.
Supposed to be 2/3.
Oh, 2/3, yeah.
Once upon a time.
And, yeah, it's,
And as Gary mentioned, the real challenge in trying to explain is if you were negative on that list, you are actually raising property taxes while you are not spending
And getting less money.
and getting less money. So
Yep.
that, in our situation, it's positive in that we're on the positive end of that equation, but there are many public schools that are on that list with the negative that are raising property taxes and they're not spending anymore at the same time, which is a very difficult combination.
We were in that situation a few years back, when you remember when we had double-digit increases. It wasn't because we had more money we were spending more, it was because of the factor of what happened with equalization.
Then you look back at the referendum and we increased our revenue cap by million, what,
2.1
2.1 million, which is on the property tax owner.
But it's because of growth.
And
It's
that's-
because of student count.
Okay, are there other questions? Is there a motion to approve the third draft of the budget as presented?
I just asked one question before you do it. Steve, we also had some actions at the budget committee with regards to some of the co-curricular pieces. Is that, you wanna put that in the handbook language, or do you want that in the third draft of the budget? Hold it to the handbook, all right.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the third draft of the budget?
I move we accept the third draft.
Second.
Mark, seconded by Joan. Any further questions, discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Okay, facility committee.
But the facility committee, we looked at the proposals for Warrior Stadium. And as it was indicated earlier this evening, we pushed off a decision based on some things that Randy and Steve are going to review. So we'll be looking at that in the August meeting. We did give approval to basically moving forward on a press box for Warrior Stadium to do some fundraising and for the dugout. Is that correct?
The facilities improvement request on number 3 for the press box was there was money donated from the families of Coach Quinn and Trotta to recognize them on the press box for their service as Hall of Fame coaches. So that was something that was brought forward as a request to the committee, and the committee approved it for consideration tonight. With regards to the dugouts, they are in their design aspects of bringing back really a schematic design of what their dugout improvements would look like. We'll bring that back through facilities and the board at a later date, but the one that's coming before you tonight is with regards to the press box and the Hall of Fame coaches recognition. Aaron, do you just want to come forward if there's any questions or to add anything additional to that? This was a request that came through Aaron, I believe, from the families, and that you had forwarded then on to me for consideration by the facilities committee.
Yeah, it originally had come from the Quinn families to Coach Rice, and then he and I sat down and talked about what would be appropriate, and if we were going to go forward with something like this, we should also recognize Coach Trout. It's a pretty unique situation of a community that's really had, a program that's only had 3 head coaches in that time frame. And we thought this would be an appropriate
And this was,
recognition.
this was prompted by Coach Quinn's passing here
Yes.
this past year.
Yep, this past fall. And then,
Mark?
My only question was, or suggestion, I think is a great idea. Both men have made a tremendous impact in the community. But as I'm looking at the design, I didn't see room for a third name to go up there possibly. And, or a fourth name sometime down the road. And so my question is, could the design, does the design provide for additions or not?
yeah,
Or could it?
We've been working with Helen Brand on the design work, and it's pretty easily, what's the word? Changeable, adaptable. I did bring that up with some people, and that person in particular kind of pushed it off, that he doesn't want it. I said, well, we're gonna. So yeah, if there comes a time where we need to add a name, that would not be the financial issue or the design issue wouldn't be. Dean, Endries, and then the people at Helm are pretty confident that they could adapt it, modify
Okay.
it, amend it, however they need it.
Okay.
I think if you look at what they're doing is they're doing the same type of lettering of what's already up there. And if you look at those, the way they're plastic and cut, you could pop those suckers off
Yep.
and re-adhere
Okay.
them by just moving them around.
Sure. All right.
So it'd be a minimalistic cost of pulling them off and you wouldn't have to recut all the letters or anything.
All right.
And the dugout piece, those were small to start with, when they did them, notoriously small, and I remember some issues with that when they built them, but, so changing that isn't.
Yeah, I don't know if you've been up to any of the baseball games. The visitors' side, there's a crack in the foundation. There's actually the dugout itself. If you look at it, as you look at the visitors' side, you can actually see the crack coming through and separating. Because what had happened was they poured the pad. They didn't make it big enough, so they tied. They tried to pour a second pad and rebar it in. And then, of course, things settle at different rates. And then, so there's some. So in that foundation, when that pad resettled, well, then so that's one issue. The other side, like Gary said, the dugouts just aren't large enough to accommodate the teams and the equipment. So it kind of defeats the purpose of a dugout. So they're, like Randy had said, they're working on some more design specifics yet on that.
The guy who offered to do the job as a past player, I'm sure it would be done.
So my question was, initially, this was not an action item, but is there
The
a piece of it that's an action
The
item?
action item is on the press box moving forward, but the dugouts piece is gonna be brought forward once they have design completed. They didn't wanna go into design in the dugouts until they had at least some comfort level that the committee would at least endorse them moving forward. So after we discussed that, the committee gave them that endorsement, and now they'll bring forward their design, and then that'll be something we can consider.
Yeah, the plan would be have something ready for the August facility meeting.
Yeah.
At least that's their hoping.
Yeah, they're hoping to do it in October, so if it doesn't happen in August, it can come in September. So we're looking for an action on the press box proposal tonight.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Dave, seconded Jack. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Summer project, Arboretum?
Yeah, Joe can put a proposal together facility committee for the playground, removing the pea gravel and replacing it with the engineered wood, which makes it handicapped accessible, just a better project. So at the facility committee, we approved that project to move forward.
Is there a motion to approve of the summer project at Arboretum?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions, discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. HR committee, and I think I'd ask Connie to come up here as well. Basically, most of our time was spent discussing the employment guidelines, and similar to what we've been doing in the past now, you will see that there are documents that we had reviewed, and we are bringing them to the board for the first kind of review, and we would be bringing them back next month for formal approval. And so the question before the board is basically if you have any questions on what is contained in these documents. Is there anything that you'd like to say, Connie, in addition to what was in our minutes about how the
So,
process happened?
There's a lot of information in your board paperwork. You had an opportunity to look at feedback that Randy and I gathered when we met with the different employee groups. And then there's a summary of all the drafted and recommended changes to each of the different employee guidelines. Most of it is pretty self-explanatory. We anticipated discussion around one of the recommendations in the teacher's employment guidelines. We had a committee that met several times throughout the last school year to talk about, mainly about points and changes to the whole point system. That discussion got a little bit bigger, but the one topic that we thought might garner more discussion tonight was about payout of points at retirement for teachers who are at a salary level that is not consistent with the total number of points they've earned during their employment. During our discussions with this work group, we all agreed on the fact that points are worth $3 apiece. But throughout time, for different reasons, teachers have not necessarily been at levels that are consistent with the points that they've earned. One of the things that the board did this year was put a floor to the amount of pay increases that would happen on an annual basis, and that's $600, where in the past it's always been $1,500, or almost always been $1,500. So as part of the discussion around all this topic, we identified points being worth $3 and tried to think of a way that we could maintain the focus on the district's desire for teachers to continue with professional development, make it something that teachers want to do so they feel that they'll be compensated for it in some way at the end. The HR committee talked about it quite a bit, asked Steve to put together some numbers to talk about how it would be paid for. The budget committee looked at it tonight and recommended approval of this language. Just a little background on that, but I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has on any of the recommendations.
And just as a reminder, we're not going to be taking action on these tonight, but the intent is to give individuals a chance to ask any questions and take their time to review everything and then act on it next month.
So,
Would you mind covering the co-curricular discussion that we had in the budget committee?
Sure. I'll do that and then I'll get to you, David.
Sure.
So part of the draft recommendations are some changes to the co-curricular salary schedule. There are 4 different positions within that co-curricular salary schedule that are being recommended to be upgraded. Those are all club advisors. We have FBLA, DECA, FFA, Skills USA, and HOSA. That recommendation came out of a review that was done of the overall co-curricular salary schedule, and The budget committee also supported those changes and recommended that the full board consider them for approval. The other change along with those upgrades is an effort to make the co-curricular base equal to the base salary for teachers. There was a point in time where it was tied, where it was the same, and then over time, when budgets have been tighter for other reasons along the way, the co-curricular base had been frozen or didn't move in lockstep with the base teacher salary. So the recommendation coming forward from the HR committee was just to increase it over time. It wasn't a specific dollar recommendation. The budget committee looked at it and said, this is important, this is something we'd like to do. Let's increase it by $2,000 a year until it reaches a point where it's consistent with the base teacher salary. So that's the recommendation coming forward for that.
Do other individuals from HR have any comments to add to our discussion? I mean, I thought you did a great job, Connie.
No, I think, it's gotta be raised, to equitable level.
Another point that we talked about in budget was those groups were chosen in particular because they had fallen behind proportionally, but at the same time, their membership had grown and their participation in state and national level contests, which also takes more time from the advisor to make it possible for those students to compete at those levels. I mean, it really is a reflection of great news for those programs and what those coaches have done with the program, and so it's a reflection of that.
And Dave, what was your question?
Okay, when I was looking at that point payout thing, so basically, if I understand it, the concept is, if you have enough points to move up a step, but you retired, then they'll take the difference in the two salaries and move that into your HRA.
Right, and it might be more than a step. Over the years, teachers may earn more points than they're able to move up.
Right.
Or, yeah, so it can be more than one step, but it's the difference in the salary that they're at when they retire
Tired.
and the salary that they would be at if their salary was consistent with their total point
Okay.
accumulation.
And what was the, I gotta admit, I couldn't find, what was the other possibility?
The other option that the committee discussed, and in the end is not the one that was being forwarded as a recommendation, was to look at the difference in the salary at retirement and the salary that they would be based on their total point accumulation, and in their last year of employment, increase their salary to that higher salary level. There was a lot of discussion around it, and the reason why the HRA recommendation is being brought forward versus the other one is the ability to fund it, we believe is in place, and I'll hand it over to Steve pretty soon to talk about that, but it was more difficult to justify that recommendation based upon the ability to fund that option two.
So option two would be moving them into that salary for their last year of employment.
Yes,
That would affect their WRS, right?
yes.
And significantly, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a huge difference between those two.
Mm-hmm.
There is. Yeah, we talked a lot about that at the committee. And truly, from a teacher perspective, it would be a better option, but from the district's ability to
Fund
pay
it.
for it,
Do we know what the dollar amount? I know we can only look at the past in a way to try and figure out what that would be. Was that looked at, that we know what the difference between those two would be?
So what we did is, first of all, we tried to figure out the amount for the teachers who retired this spring and those who retired last spring, so we identified what that dollar amount would be. In the committee, we did calculate out some examples of if somebody would have received those funds in their last year's salary for the WRS versus the HRA, and it truly does make a difference one way or another. The HRA program has been very successful, so there was some discussion about the fact that retirement dollars going into healthcare, there wouldn't be enough for anybody anyways, so that is a very good way to pay out the funds. And there was support for how the HRA program has gone. But then when you look at the funding element to it, our Fund 73, which is our post-employment retirement account, has a natural connection to be able to fund a benefit program like this by the funds that are being returned to us on an annual basis from teachers who resign. And that connection just was there to allow a benefit program like this to be basically fully funded from day one. And those funds that are within our Fund 73 other post-employment benefits can only be used in this manner. So there was really a natural fit to be able to just completely fund this based on that program. It's certainly not the only way it could be done, which is why during those discussions we explored the other option as well. But the thought process in the end was that the HRA model, or the model of paying in retirement, would be more broadly supported because the funds are available to basically fully fund it already on an annual basis without allocating any dollars from the district's budget. It could just be funded. So that's why the thought was to move that process forward, that proposal forward.
Can we tell what the dollar difference between the two proposals is?
Are you saying like the impact on the Wisconsin retirement system? for
The
individual?
impact on our budget. If we ran one way, how much is it? If we ran the other way, how much is it?
Okay, so the only difference would be because it's still the same calculation, right? Somebody's points at retirement versus where they would. If it was paid through salary, it would have a benefit roll-up, which is about 15% more. So it's just about a 15% add-on, and so for an annual payment of $20,000, you're talking $3,000 more per year to go the salary route. So the cost difference is minimal.
To us, the cost difference would be minimal between the two plans.
It would be.
What would be the difference for the employee between the two plans?
You know, that was discussed probably 6 months ago at a committee meeting. I don't have that off the top of my head, but we did lay out the two scenarios. I just don't remember what that would be without going back and looking at it.
For us, the cost would be $23,000. That would be out of our operating budget.
Out of the operating budget.
Versus the other way, it's not out of our operating budget.
23,000 per retiree
Whatever
per
per year.
It's whatever the year is.
Versus
This
zero.
year, by what he had from last year's retirees, it'd be 23,000. Next year, it could be 40,000.
Right.
Next year, it could be 15,000. You don't
But-
know what
but
that
if-
would be. So it's an unknown future budget thing that you'd have to budget in.
But you're saying that the difference would be about 15% between the two different options.
Yes.
But where the
That
source of
doesn't make
funds is
sense.
different.
No, the difference is we fund it either through the budget or you fund it through, it's funded through the whatever that is.
Those
Right.
And
funds
that
that
takes
get
care of it.
returned.
We don't have to budget it.
Right, so there's two different differences. One is that if it's paid in salary, you have to add the 15% roll for benefits, which is about 3,000 per year based on the review that we did. And then there's a funding difference as well. The funding difference is within Fund 73 or the post-employment trust, the dollars are already sitting there that could be available towards this. In the district's general fund, you would need to allocate the funds to be able to do so. So there is a funding difference, and the amount difference is about probably 3,000 per year.
Okay, Lauren?
But to clarify, the HRA has a zero impact on the budget because the money's already there, whereas the cash payout, somehow we have to find the revenue to support it. So in the example, that'd be 23,000 versus zero. Is that correct?
Through Fund 10, yes.
Right.
That is correct, yeah.
Just in budget, we only heard the second option, and I didn't go read the HR minutes, so I didn't know about the first option, so we didn't get to discuss that one, but.
I guess the other thing, Dave, is we can look at past history and try to predict, but there's no way to know who's
Year
gonna
to year.
retire, and since we don't know who's gonna retire, we don't know what their points look like,
Right.
and
How to budget.
do they have a lot banked up or not? So there's no way to give a really accurate.
And we felt both proposals were good, which is why we were
Mhm.
reviewing them. We thought both proposals were very worthy of the discussion that took place at the teacher points process as well as the HR committee. They're both very good proposals. They both have slightly different impacts. The salary affects the WRS, then the payment is taxable, and then it typically would only be used for healthcare and your after-tax income. The district would fund it out of Fund 10. The other one is tax-free to the individual. It can grow over time and earn interest. So those who don't need to tap into it immediately for healthcare can put those dollars aside tax-free. Those dollars do grow to the individual, they don't grow to the district. So any investment earnings and any approach that the individual chooses to take, it directly benefits them, and there's a funding source. So they're just two different proposals. They're both good. You know, as the committee was looking at them, we both felt that they were both improvements to the points process to make either one of those available at the point of retirement.
Okay, Jack?
Go ahead, Gary.
So in today's question that he's asking, and we didn't discuss it, the benefit of paying it to them in their year's salary would be what? That they get their wages higher, and that affects their retirement income?
That's a great question, because the Wisconsin retirement system is a formula, and probably the largest aspect of it is your 3 highest years of salary. If one of those 3 final years is higher, it directly impacts your pension payments for the remainder of your life. So it is a significant factor to be paid that way. It is taxable, but the only caveat with that is that it's a Fund 10 payment then. But yes, that was looked at. And during one of the committee meetings, I had printed out from the Wisconsin Retirement System calculator an estimate of what that would be for a particular individual. So we did look very closely at both of those scenarios. And really the gist of the final recommendation was really a goal to seek broad support for one of those 2 proposals, and knowing that one of them would have a fully funded mechanism sitting there within our Fund 73. So that was really the difference between the 2, and the decision to move it forward, that those funds are available within Fund 73 and would not affect the district's general fund in any way. So that was really, I guess, the tipping point between the 2 of them. But again, we felt both of them were strong proposals and worthy of consideration.
And I guess the hope is that we would have more money available on an ongoing basis to be able to add continually to salaries in the point system as well. I mean, it's just in times like this when we have to play the games, and hopefully we'll still be able to add to salary based, the points component, once we know what our final numbers are, is our hope.
And I think, who knows what budgets are.
That's just it.
So, I think it's, around the table as we were talking about it, having a safe funding mechanism. You put the money in there, you can't take it out, you can't use it for other things. We thought that was the best for our retirees.
Are there any other questions, or? Yeah,
Just a
Gary?
comment, it's a great benefit, either which way, but it's a great benefit to give them. That's a good thing.
Any other questions for me? So again, this was sort of your first reading, and then it will be on the agenda at the August meeting for final approval.
And I'm assuming if anybody has questions between now and our August meeting, they can shoot them your way in terms of other language that they might see.
Yes, I would be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. And other than superintendent evaluation, there was no other action item on our agenda. Any other questions on what you see in the HR minutes? Okay, on to policy committee.
Policy Committee, you have the second reading of the high school graduation policy. I'm going to ask Tim to come forward too. I think there's another item we'd like to talk to you about that's related to the policy that came through to us on Friday that we thought this was a venue for us to discuss with you. But first of all, with regards to the second reading of the policy, is there any questions related to that? This is the time when we would take action on the policy as well.
I guess I would just like to say that this is an improvement that policy-wise is intended to give some more flexibility. It's not so much that we have less of a conviction over some of the specific classes we were or were not recommending and were part of policy language before. So I hope it's not interpreted that way, and I hope it's not, more discussion needs to happen on what we say are specific classes that we're making be requirements. It's an improvement that policy doesn't specify that. It's not a reflection that we think some of those classes are any less important than we did before.
I think we're comfortable with the policy as it's written and being proposed.
And I think if you were to look at different districts, you'd see there are a lot of different approaches districts take. And in many cases, you know, to Julie's point, a lot of these expectations are set in handbooks and elsewhere, and not in formal policy. So, yeah, very comfortable with this. This in no way is placing less of an emphasis on any particular area. And I think it's a good and well-needed change. The only change, since you saw this for the first reading, is what we talked about at that meeting, changing, I believe, courses to credits.
Right.
And that's reflected in the draft. Just as part of this, and we're going to come back in the fall, maybe in a regular meeting, maybe in a special meeting, kind of depending on what your preference is, for a fuller treatment of online learning. But we had a situation that came to our attention last week, and it kind of falls within kind of what our expectations are for the program, and just kind of wanted to take your temperature on it, just because we've had some discussions and feel we need a little guidance on it. So we have, without going into too much detail, a resident family that has, for many years, homeschooled their child, that would like to have the child attend our high school, I believe, in a conventional face-to-face manner in 2 years, but is looking to begin to transition their child from the homeschool type programming to your conventional public school programming by looking at virtual education for the 8th grade year. And they're looking to potentially open enroll with WEVA, which is McFarland's virtual school, which would be an open enrollment out for us. And I have connected briefly with the family just to make them aware that we, in principle, have the ability to provide an 8th grade online program. But I explained to the parent that I spoke with that while we've had high school students that have taken partial or full online programs, and we've had middle school students who've taken a partial online program, we've never had a middle school student take an entirely online program. And I know that there have been some discussions around the table of kind of what our expectations. When we entered into doing more with virtual education, say 4 years ago, the direction of the board at that time was very clear. This was exactly the kind of situation where you wanted us to make online options available to families. That was one of, at the time, the board's key drivers. But, we're 4 years down the road, it's a different board, and we certainly didn't want to go too far in these conversations with this family and kind of get into something that we haven't really done before, without just kind of, within the context of graduation requirements and overall program, kind of where you were at on this. And if you have no strong opinion, we'll just follow up with them, but I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of get your opinion on that.
So they've got an 8th grade student that is going to be taking 8th grade totally online, and then with the understanding that they come into 9th grade at Waunakee.
Yes.
And they're either gonna take online with us, or they're gonna open and roll out to an option that would allow them to take online.
For 8th grade? But the plan is still to come here for 9th grade?
That's the discussion thus far. yes.
Okay, I mean, I'm just trying to understand the,
You're not locked into that.
Parents have choices, they can,
Oh, I know.
they have a lot of
Choices, I mean,
choices these days.
You start to, we're opening it, it's a question and a conversation we're gonna have.
exactly.
So that was a piece that came to us on Friday, and we were thinking about how to, we do have a timeline of which we have to respond, if I believe, I don't,
We have to act on their open enrollment application as well.
right.
Well, I guess, so when I'm looking at this policy, the only reference to middle school students has to do with, you know, where the credits are counted. So,
Well,
you know, regardless.
plus we satisfy, in our system, and I really don't know what McFarland does, I should check with McFarland. In our system, we exercise the flexibility in state law to satisfy a quarter credit of the overall half credit health requirement in the 8th grade. Not all districts do that. Some districts deliver the entire half credit of health in high school only. So where the child takes, depending on what McFarland's WEVA does, which I don't know right now, what they take for 8th grade would have some bearing on the health piece.
I guess I don't see that in here, where is the?
It's in there someplace.
Yeah,
Okay.
I remember
Okay,
that
okay.
reference before.
Okay,
Part of the reason I brought it to this conversation, Peggy, was I felt it did fit in with continuation at high school. We're making a decision that even though there's a dialogue that's stating 8th grade, as Tim said, there's always choices that people
Yep.
make as they move forward. I felt this was at least a venue, as we've been talking about requirements, classes, flexibility, and online, even though we haven't flushed those totally out. We wanted to just kind of get a sense of where the board was with a request like we have sitting on our desk now.
Mark?
I guess I'm just real confused. Isn't homeschooling an option to take a online curriculum, whether it's through another school district or through a private vendor as their curriculum?
Right, what they're saying is that they've been homeschooling, they're now looking to use some more structured curriculum. They're either gonna do it through us, which then we would count them for membership, or they're gonna go to McFarland, of which it'll be an open enrollment out for us. Those are your, if you kind of follow the.
Okay.
this
So
is
if they would
this
do
is-
the McFarland,
there's
they
two
technically
pieces here.
aren't out, I mean,
There's
that's
a-
automatically open enrollment.
Right, so yeah, you're right, as a homeschooler, you can take whatever curriculum you want without our oversight or decisions.
Might
But
be
at this
online,
point-
might not be.
But there's a point here where they're starting to want to bridge into the public system.
Okay.
So you have a programmatic piece, and then you have a dollars and cents aspect of it.
Yep.
Gary?
So right now, they're considered a zero,
Yes.
and if they opt out, they're a negative, and if they opt in, they're
But yes.
If what we're being asked is, do we want to allow them to do online through us 100% for 8th grade?
That's part of what.
I don't think we're prepared to do that. I mean, I get a class or two here or there, but online learning is not the same as classroom learning. And I would not feel comfortable endorsing that as equal. In other words, if they're confident their child will be ready for our high school, Godspeed, but I would not want the added endorsement that what we're providing online will be successful in, do you know what I'm saying?
And I think, and this is part of where we have some, probably more discussion to have, is when we did bring in the online a few years ago, it was with partial intent at least to, as we were, our students who are open enrolling out are doing many of that through online options. And the online option that we've chosen is one that other districts use through some other charter opportunities. So it was an opportunity to try to bring some of those students back into our system with then the hopes that they would transition into our other programs as well. So that was kind of the impetus of our discussion
Yep.
3-4 years ago. But you're right, Julie, the question that we're sitting with is, we have a request to basically allow for are we, from a district policy perspective, wherever it falls, are we prepared to want to allow a full-time 8th grader to be online? That's the basic question.
Do we have the capacity to provide them the framework to do that?
Absolutely.
You mean a staff person to hold
No,
them
no, no,
accountable?
no. I mean, for
No.
example, I mean, we have kids who are in the alternative school who are doing a whole semester or 2 semesters of online education that's still considered part of our system.
Mhm.
So I'm assuming we have access to the same kinds of programming at the 8th grade level.
Oh, we absolutely do, and, you know, by way of comparison, I mean, the family had also put into Middleton Cross Plains 21st Century eSchool, which is also part of the eSchool network, but they're constituted as a virtual charter to take outside open enrollment kids, which we don't do. They had a capacity issue, I'm not exactly sure the background of it.
Sure.
We have exactly the same reservoir of courses Middleton Cross Plains does. Our capacity to do it is not really the
Okay.
question. 2 years ago,
Okay.
I was saying this to Randy at the end of the week,
Yep.
2 years ago, I felt I had a pretty, still working off kind of the earlier direction, we probably wouldn't have even
Right.
come in for some perspective on this, but we've had a lot of conversations around this table in the last year where I think that maybe the interest has shifted a little bit, and that's why we're coming into some kind of.
Because our online program is the Wisconsin eSchool Network, which is what we bought into, which is the same program that many of the virtual
see.
charters have brought into as well. And we vetted some different ones out when we looked at that. But I agree with Kim. The reason we're here is really because we've had some nebulous conversation, a different changing, evolving conversation over the last year.
Is there a reason that if they want to transition back into a more structured program, that they wouldn't transition in 8th grade? Is there a reason that they hold off to high school, or
Well,
or could there be a blend
I mean,
of some
again,
strategy?
individual families have a lot of flexibility and choices today. The environment affords them that. And different families, and really even in families, they'll look at individual children and say, we think this is the right step for this child, not for that child. You know, so we see some families look to shift from a homeschooling situation typically at the high school point, because they feel if they're looking at college, that moving from a more generally based program to the high school program, that's where their child needs to be prepared for that next step. Now, different families will, and again, within families, look at each child on his or her own terms, might make different decisions about how best to bridge them. Partly because homeschool covers a multitude of, there's a great diversity of what homeschooling can look like. And so, but just in speaking with this family, from their perspective, they see their bridge to the high school being an 8th grade year of online education through some kind of public school online program.
We've had, like with our athletics, we're already accepting, correct? If we have students that are homeschooled and they want to be
Just
in our athletic program.
in the middle school, correct?
But here's another issue now, in talking with this parent, I don't think it's an issue for
Socialization.
this family, but it could be an issue in other scenarios,
Sure.
which is if they open and roll out to WEVA, then they're not able to access our co-curricular programs. If they take online with us, they could. Based on my initial conversations with this parent, they're not really interested in our co-curricular.
I get that, but if we're looking at doing this, and I'm not saying one way or the other, I'm just saying, how do we look at going forward with this? This isn't going away. We
No,
talk about online
no.
stuff as being a future thing. do we look at a charter school where we're doing something where it associates with our other curriculum, our bands, all our other stuff that we have to offer, and do we do a charter school, or I'm just brainstorming here, do we do a charter school, or do we do some side program that allows for these kind of students? I don't know.
I think the only thing a charter would add under this scenario would allow you to take open enrollment in.
Correct. Yes.
So I mean, as far as programmatically, it would be no different.
I mean, the big difference between what we're doing and what a Middleton or a McFarland is doing, McFarland on a very large scale, is by running a virtual charter, they're able to take in non-resident pupils to the open enrollment program and serve them virtually. Whereas the only students we serve through our virtual education programs are resident pupils.
And most of those are on more of a blended model, or from our students who have been in our at-risk program that we've had special programming for. So
I think this warrants additional discussion. Do you need anything from us tonight? Because I think that, I mean, other than the approval of this, I mean.
You need to give an answer here shortly, don't you?
Well,
What's our timeline?
That's my question.
This is coming through the special open enrollment provisions, and I don't have that on my.
And that's the other wrinkle that we've got to discuss, is that this is and again, I just had the initial conversations, this is coming out of the standard window, this is a best interest of the child situation. But again, we tend to be family friendly when we're dealing with resident families historically.
And this is a resident family.
This is a resident family.
Yeah.
But yes, in terms of their decision-making, you know, I'd like to follow up and give them a general sense of our direction.
Because I have different feelings about, I think, the possibilities of virtual online learning as well. I mean, I think there are some wonderful opportunities that it provides certain students who learn well that way, and so I have a different opinion based on experience and a lot of dialogue with people who choose to send their children to school that way, and a lot of reservations as well, personal, based on personal, but I understand where they're coming from and understand how the benefits that this also provides for certain students, and so I'm not in a position to say that we shouldn't be considering something like this, or at least be looking at alternative delivery models, but to be vigilant in how we decide what courses and the content, you know, what do they actually deliver what we consider excellence in education versus the reputation of some of the others out there. And I think WVA does that, but does it do it, you know, would it meet our standards as well? And so, you know, that's where I start getting hung up, because I do know that there's some real benefits to that type of learning environment. So that's why I'm on this one.
I guess my concern is I don't think we should delay this to August. They need a decision. From my perspective, based on language we've crafted for this policy, things we're doing for students who are in the alternative school or are being punished through expulsion, we have an online system that we've trusted you guys meets the criteria to allow them to transition back in. So I'm not worried about the credibility of that program. Just as a side, I spoke with an online teacher today at the Splash Park in DeForest, and discovered that she, and at least through the Merrill program, I'm assuming McFarland's the same, and I don't know if ours would be, that they have to go along with the teacher effectiveness program. I mean, it's very, it's accountable, and so we may have a concern about where this goes in the future. I don't think we're creating policy. I like to meet the needs of the family.
Yeah, and I would really like to meet the families in our district and work with them, if at all possible. I mean, I think that was one of the reasons we adopted the e-school program, is to try to accommodate these kinds of situations.
I think this discussion has really helped, and I guess I'm feeling better about it than what I was, but I still would hope that would we help them select which classes were appropriate? Or is this all still, they're gonna say, this is what we're taking and this is how we want it to count?
You know, what we
What's our
just-
role or responsibility in terms of helping the class selection process that would best aid in the transition?
Well, when a student is taking our courses as part of being enrolled in our program, we work with them on their course selection, whether it's an online course or whether it's a face-to-face course. So, you know, we would recommend, here are the recommended courses. I mean, it's not a case where people can just pick whatever they want.
Right.
We have a recommended program.
Great.
They're one of our
You know, there's
students.
an 8th grade English course,
There you go.
you know, I think it comes in,
They
where's
are
it,
very good.
it'd come in more with things like, where's the child at mathematically, which
Mhm.
math course is the
Correct.
right course, things like that. You know, I think, you know, the bigger question is, you know, parents may still decide to go, you know, someplace else, you know, but that's typically it. What I would say here also is, this is not intended to be us, you know, checking in with you to open the door to a whole new thing. It's just, this is something new that we haven't done before. We didn't feel comfortable even doing the one-off here because it was new enough at the 8th grade level without, you know, getting some feedback.
This really came as an open enrollment request out.
Correct.
And what we were looking at was, we have the ability to offer that
It's the
here.
same
Yeah, we
thing.
have it.
I get
Yeah,
it.
we
And
have
so
the
that was
curriculum.
And they may
was-
still go with WEVA. I mean,
Sure,
I just-
sure.
I just feel we
Option.
can't go much into a conversation with them without knowing that it's truly a conversation. That we've got your.
I would
Yeah.
suggest that we keep the student here.
Mhm.
Yeah, don't close any doors.
Yeah.
And just monitor the program.
Yep.
See how it goes, and if it goes well, you know,
Yeah.
it's a test
Yep.
case.
Okay, well, first of all, okay, we'll have two or less comments because we do need to approve of the policy.
The other
language
policy.
as
Right.
as well, so. Okay, Gary?
I have no problem with that. I still think, as a general, high school socialization is one of the most important parts of it. Julie brings that up, and I think it's true.
Agreed.
On developing young people and how you interact and what you do, so I think that's important too. I don't know how you integrate it or how you make that work, and that's always been part of the question and problem, and I would hope that that's something we work towards. Online learning, and as we've discussed with some, and that's not, we have to figure that out.
Yeah.
Yep,
Agreed.
yep.
But the socialization part of that is important as the book part of it in a lot of cases, and I would
Agreed.
hope that we would try and integrate that.
I would think that while we're saying kind of yes to this one, that either, well, both the curriculum and the policy committee need to start looking at this, because I don't like the concept of parents coming in saying, this is how you're gonna teach my kid. And while you may say the classes, I can say whether they're gonna be in your building ever again. And in effect, that's what you could be seeing here, is saying, I'm not gonna attend 8th grade school, but I want you to give me an 8th grade degree.
Yeah, I want my
And then
diploma
next
from
year, it's
high
like, I
school.
want the same for 9th grade.
Yep.
And then I
Can't
want
they
the
do
same
that
for
now?
10th grade. No, we don't have that right now. We have students that, due to various reasons of discipline or
Specific
whatever,
circumstance.
or specific circumstances, we
No,
put
but
them into that program.
Parents can dictate,
But-
though, if they wanna come to our 8th grade or go to.
Right, they can
charter
open and
school,
roll out.
Or, yeah, they can open and roll.
We're
out.
not saying, but does that mean we give up on the socialization and we give up on that concept because we get $1,500 for it?
No, I
If they
think-
open and roll out, that's their choice. They can always open and roll out. But at what point do we sit there and say, because they live in our community, we will change and modify our standards in order to save $1,500?
I'm
I
not
don't
saying
think
that
we should.
change or modify our standards.
But I think we need to take a serious look at the fact of how much are we gonna allow open enrollment to dictate what our curriculum and school attendance policies are? Because that's in effect what we just did here.
Right.
We said, open enrollment, our worry of the student moving out says, we just changed, we're considering it. And I think that's a serious discussion you should talk about before you start saying that a parent can walk in, and in order to keep them in our district, we will let them decide how they want their child to be educated.
Point of clarity?
Yep.
I think open enrollment was mentioned as one reason. my
That's
comment
okay.
was to meet the needs of a family in the district. And, you know, whether we're allowing students to graduate early or take a course E-line so that they can be part of the community, to me, that's an important cultural value that we're trying to provide for the people in our community. And this is just, I think this is a wave of the future. I'm not saying the online thing is, I just think alternative ways of educating is going to keep coming on and more and more and more. And we, as a community, we're going to have to grapple with what does that mean? But we're trying to serve a family. We're not saying save them from going to some other district.
But when we're saying serve a family, what was the family's need for this? We haven't even asked that question. We're just saying the family wanted this.
I think we did
And-
ask it.
Yeah.
And it was, they just felt.
To
there's-
transition from to a more rigid curriculum without necessarily going into a concrete
I think
school.
they're trying to transition into the face-to-face high school.
Right.
And using this as their bridge into the public
And
schools.
and if we had a policy or a setup that said this is how that works, that'd be one thing, but what if they come back next year and just say the same thing? What do we do next year?
I'll argue
There's
that
nothing
Yeah,
here.
that's-
E-online school is more rigid than our
Mhm, I bet it is.
what, alternative school. I have a bigger problem with that. I think
Oh,
this
yeah, I can
E-online,
agree with
answer me this, is the E-online, these classes, they would be taking more rigid than our
Rigorous.
alternative school classes.
These would be structured general ed classes just delivered virtually, but they'd be organized in conventional units. The organization of the units would be. very
Requires a lot
But
I've
the
known-
content is
personal.
just as rigorous. The
It
content is
requires
just
a lot
as
more
rigorous.
personal discipline and,
So-
because you don't have
Yeah.
the.
That's my point. So when we're doing our alternative school, which we've had kids go through and they graduate and do everything, and to me, the standard isn't the same as the people that go through our curriculum. This is gonna be a little closer.
Okay, Randy's.
So I would just say that, like I said before, I use charter school, I use whatever. I think in the future, we need to figure out a way to integrate this.
Yeah.
Okay, Randy?
Yeah, I think one of the things, to your point, Dave, I think a few others have said it, we're already lined up to have the conversation about online this fall. So that has to come because it's becoming a more complex, more involved, and it's becoming, there's different issues coming forward with it. The second part is the conversation that Tim and I are bringing forward tonight is because we have an open enrollment out request.
And we need to make a decision.
And we need to make a decision on it. And the conversation Tim and I had was, they're requesting out for an online experience in 8th grade, who's a resident student of ours. We offer online. But the question that we had was really based off of preempting that conversation of online, but us needing to make a decision in 2 weeks.
Got it.
So do we say, yes, we're gonna approve the open enrollment, of which we have a resident student now going to another district? Or do we call the parent up, which I know Tim's had some conversations with them, and say, as an alternative, we have a program here we can offer you to keep you in your own community. And their preference, I believe, is to try to transition into a high school, preferably our high school. So that's really the dialogue I think we're trying to have. But I think it does open up, what does the following year look like? I think we have to cross that bridge when you get there. I think you start to look at that once you start accumulating more credits. From my perspective, I think it's worthy of the conversation to say, how can we keep a student in our community through the online courses we have and try to bridge that discussion. But we've also need to be in line with having the broader discussion around this table come fall. So those are kind of the sense of, that's what's really brought it here.
Exactly, and in the process, you've given us, obviously some key questions that when we have this more in-depth discussion in the fall, it's going to be helpful in us getting ready for that.
So in short, we want to work with them, but we're not saying that endorses that methodology for the next 5 years.
Right.
Correct.
Correct.
Because we would help them work through it potentially for 8th grade, they should not assume.
Right.
Correct. This is a discussion about the 8th grade
Right.
here. But
Right.
because we've never done a full program
Right.
for 8th grade, especially given some of the recent discussions, we just didn't feel comfortable
Right.
unilaterally
Yep.
doing that without coming in and having a conversation with everybody.
Right.
So, do you need a vote?
No,
No.
what we do need to do is vote on
I
the
need a vote on the
second reading of the
policy.
policy.
Yeah, sorry. I brought it in as a tangent to
Yes,
the
it's kind of
policy.
an
'cause it was-
FOIS related.
There
It
was
was
a
a great
real
discussion,
nexus.
though.
There was a
It
nexus.
wonderful, yes.
But yes, this is, I don't need an action, and then I need an action on the
No.
policy.
Okay, is there a motion to
Motion to
approve?
approve the policy as presented.
Okay,
Second.
Thank you, Tim.
thank you, Tim.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Okay, on to the consent agenda. We've got checks, annual standards notification, a variety of items that we can either choose to approve in total or pull something aside for separate discussion and
Joan.
consideration. Yes, Joan?
Yes, I'd like to pull out the testing schedule.
Okay, you'd like to pull
Actually-
out the testing assessment schedule adoption for separate discussion?
For a separate discussion.
Okay. Are there any other items that individuals would like to have pulled out?
Do we make a comment on an item, or do we have to pull it out to make the comment?
You have to pull it out and have separate discussion. Then what we'll do is we'll approve of everything else and then come back to those items that have been pulled out for separate discussion.
Well, I'm not against the piano donation, but I want to,
Okay, well, what we can do is we can
Discuss.
make an approval for all the consent agenda except for item C, and then have discussion about the items that we have under consideration for approval. So in other words, make a motion to approve of everything on the consent agenda except for item C.
yep.
And then have
And
discussion.
then have a second, then we'll discuss all the items that are considered under that
Right.
motion.
Okay,
Motion to approve everything except item C.
second.
Moved in second. Any discussion on those items? And,
Item B,
mhm.
does that also incorporate that we use a Common Core? Or is that a separate is that a separate motion that we've got to do later in the year?
No, that incorporates, this is our annual standards notification, so this meets the standard of the law that's required on an annual basis.
Okay.
So my comment on the donation of the piano is, I'm grateful that we're getting it. However, one of the comments after you read through the document is that, you know, they've got some of the oldest pianos in the district. One of the reasons I thought that we had the carryover budget is that we can start replacing those pianos,
Oh.
which makes it frustrating to read those comments that we still have the old pianos.
Thank you, Jack.
Agreed.
Okay.
So I question where that carryover budget is being used.
Okay.
And-
They're still in charge of their own carryover budgets, so someone in that building would have to make pianos a priority for part of that carryover budget in order, is that not correct?
What would normally occur if there was yes, that would come forward from the staff to, in this case, if it's the middle school, to Marcy with regards to a need for replacing the piano, and then that would be utilized through the carryover funds. So unless that dialogue has come forward through there for the allocation of that, that's where that comes from. But we have replaced pianos through carryover budgets over the last few years, and I know Steve and I have made it very clear that that's the place where those should be taking place.
Is there anything wrong with an old piano?
No, I'm not, well, I guess what was wrong with an old piano was they couldn't tune them anymore and we were still playing them. So,
An
so
old
that
culture.
was the,
Ability.
one of the comments that came out of
Okay.
the carryover.
Sure.
Are there any other comments on the items under consideration for approval? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Okay, back to item C, annual testing and assessment schedule adoption. I'd like to make a motion to approve. We can have separate discussion, or did you want to have,
Well,
I know you
what I
talked
would
about
like
it
to do,
earlier.
or what I would like to suggest is, we treat the testing schedule kind of like our handbook items where we have a first reading. When I looked at that, I was surprised to see it in the consent agenda items, without any discussion. I had a pretty long discussion with Tim today, and I followed up with Chris Etzel. I guess some of my My biggest concerns are, again, the amount of testing, what we hear at the listening sessions every single year. Particularly when I look at middle school and we have the forward test in the spring of the year and then we have that third assessment in the spring of the year. That third assessment of our universal screeners, that's another 2-hour block of time. What do we use that information? Who uses that information? So I tried to follow up with Chris Hetzel today to see if it was used for placement. She said, oh no, its placement is done way before that last test. I get that, you know, I still, when we go to listening sessions and they start talking about testing, I want to be able to justify our testing. And I can't. I cannot justify that third universal screener. I just would like more follow-up. I'd like to be able to talk to teachers and other administrators how the information is used before we just say, yeah, we'll just do them all.
Okay, in the past, I believe that this item would have come through curriculum committee,
And it
probably an agenda, and then, I mean, and so it's on here now because we're looking for probably ways to streamline. That's how that happened, I'm not sure, but, okay. Mark?
I'd like to support Joan's concern.
Mhm.
I spoke with a number of teachers because of an issue that came up several weeks ago. One of the recurring themes was not necessarily opposition to the third test because it's part of the STAR or the MAPS, but when it has to occur, which is after the state test, which we can't get rid of. And so perhaps that needs to be the discussion. What is the value of the third part of that testing? And would staff and administration feel comfortable eliminating that? Because to do a 2-hour or 3-hour Aspire and then follow that up with, or whether it's a forwards test, you come up with a name, you're doing back-to-back testing of a significant nature. What are you getting out of it? And you are losing class time again. I think both staff and students are fatigued by it, and to what ends. And so,
I would just like more time
to discuss it.
to discuss it with people who have more direct information and knowledge than I have or that we've been provided.
So just save us who aren't former teachers, and only hear from our kids who say, I had to take another 2-hour test. So the STAR test is voluntary on our part, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we could get rid of it if we wanted to. And the forward one is required. Is the STAR test the only voluntary test in all this testing?
Yeah.
So, first of all, we couldn't just, I don't want to create a false assumption on anybody's part, we could just entirely get rid of the STAR test or the MAP test or anything like that. I think the question would be how many students take it and how many times a year do they take it? There'd be certain kinds of placement decisions that would be needed for, it's required for RTI and for special ed referrals to have local assessment systems like that. But it's not necessarily required that all kids take it 3 times a year. One of the questions that will sometimes come up in a school is, could we shrink it down? And typically they look at the number of students who need to take it, and the number is enough that in the past, faculties have decided, well, if I'm gonna have a third of my class gone, I might as well administer it to all of them. But again, times change, and I don't want to pretend that there is professional unanimity among our teachers. There are teachers who have very strongly held opinions. It partly depends on what you teach. These are standardized assessments of English language arts and mathematics. If I don't teach those subjects, the direct utility of those tests to me is not that significant. So it's a complicated thing. I do think, if if I were to look at the amount of testing today, and Randy could speak to this, back when, compared to when we broke in the profession just 25 years ago, and, you know, there's definitely more standardized testing today. We probably don't have any more testing. I would say we probably have a little less testing than most of our surrounding districts, but there's no question we test more than 10 years ago, certainly more than 25 years ago. So it's a very legitimate discussion to have. And I think it'll come down to how is the data used, you know, when do we schedule it? And I'll tell you right now, it's a dilemma, and there will not be unanimity, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have the conversation and look at this and areas we can make some tweaks.
Then is it possible, one, when do we have to have this decided by?
It's before us tonight because you wanted to be able to give it to staff, I
I
imagine,
would
in the
like to
fall.
have something to share with staff, just so they have some general planning. Now, I will say this, the testing windows for winter and spring on this, ever since we moved to state spring testing, have always been provisional. I mean, we adjust those on a school-by-school basis in the spring, depending on what the school wants to do in terms of the actual scheduling of the assessment. 2 years ago, the middle school actually split their math testing before and after the Badger exam. This year, I think they decided to put it all after the Badger exam. The changes really reflect, again, the challenges of fitting all this assessment in the spring. There's no question it's a challenge.
The purpose of the report that you see in front of you, and the format of it, came out of, I believe, a request a few years ago where you went through with staff and reviewed all of our assessments.
We had a major review.
We had a major review. And it was identifying what was given at what grade levels, what was the purpose, which is to a degree what your type is, responsible party, and then your estimated time, to try to get a sense of what all those were. So the purpose for this coming back through was as really a communication piece, as we're going to be rolling it out to staff as far as when are the different assessments, because that's
Yes.
just so that we have the big picture of that. So I don't think there's anything drastically changed in here from last year, other than obviously dates and
This is the
such.
same schedule as we've had since we had the review 3 years ago.
Right.
Now, I will say this, you know, when we made the change 3 years ago, we changed from the math to the star in the lower grades to save time.
Right.
At that point in time, the middle school was not prepared to make that shift because they had a lot of placement decisions, you know, for RTI and other things, all structured around the math. They're very comfortable with the math test. And they wanted to let the STAR exam go a few years in lower grades before they would look at it. They had some preliminary discussions around it this year. They didn't get far enough to make a decision on making a change away from the math for next year. But I know from the discussions Marcy had with her teachers back at the end of May, the topic of is the math, the assessment we're going to give at the middle school. It's going to come up again with their faculty in the fall. But that's different than the question of optional versus required for kind of the kids in the middle that don't necessarily have a high stakes. Now, for strategic planning, school improvement, you know, parents being able to see fall to spring growth on a report at the end of the year, that's an entirely separate question from the placement of the other stuff. Lots of different angles to
Yeah,
this.
but I don't know what factor the number of tests plays on some people choosing to opt out, you know.
So the question that I'm hearing, and I think I've heard it a couple times, is the purpose for the third universal screener. What is the information used for, and flexibility for it being associated right after state testing?
Well,
Yeah, how far apart we
right.
can give those.
There's that, but there's also, you know, at least at K4, well, I don't know, K4, 1-4 for sure. There's another required reading test that's the BAS, or how do you say that?
Yes.
Which
Transparent assessment
is
system.
is systematic as well.
Correct.
And so, I mean, this gets kind of all the big ones, but there are also other ones on top of this that we're also testing on, which is part, and again, I've heard a lot of support for STAR, I've heard a lot of support for the, is it
BAS.
BAS,
And
BAS.
that's titled on there too. That's
But
under the K4.
the big concern is the fatigue between the state test and the third part of the STAR. I think that's the biggest frustration I've heard.
Right.
Yep. And the STAR is a shorter assessment than the math, which I think is something, Joan, you and I discussed today. Most kids on the STAR complete it in between 20 and 35 minutes per reading test, math test. The map typically comes in more, the map's an untimed test, so every kid is different. The very deliberate child can take a long time on the map, but most map tests are 40 to 65 minutes. So about 20 minutes more per test than the STAR, which is one of the reasons in the lower grades we went from map to STAR. Probably not as in-depth an assessment as the map, but it gives us enough, saves time.
45 minutes taking a test in third grade, yeah.
So we'll bring this
Okay, so
back
bring
next.
this
We'll bring this back
We'll
next
bring it
month.
back next month also.
If any of you have specific questions, I mean, I've got, I think, a good sense of some of Joan's questions, which is very helpful to me. Thank you, Joan. But if, any of you have specific questions or pieces of information you'd like to see in advance of our August meeting, just contact, me offline, and we'll make sure we have it for you to the extent that we can.
Fewer the better, as long as we can make decisions with what we've got.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Tim, thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
Okay, board business, just as an FYI, everybody probably receives in the mail from WASB a variety of different different seminars that they offer, and I think there's just a copy of this. was
Does everybody
included in
receive those in the mail? That was a
Mhm.
question Rebecca and I
Yes.
had.
I do.
So you do,
Yes.
all right. Do you
Yes.
still want them in the packet, or do you see them at home? Is that, good enough? Because I
Okay.
get those and I usually,
Okay, so we
Save
get them
on
at home.
paper.
very good, very good.
Okay, future agendas and meetings,
I think we have all of our meetings scheduled that we need.
okay,
We've done those offline or with the committee, at the committee level.
okay, wonderful. No need to go into closed session, a motion to approve, please.
So
To
moved.
adjourn? I'm sorry, what did I say, motion to approve?
Motion to approve
Move we
adjournment.
adjourn.
It's breaking hay all day with the technology that's around to me now. Motion to adjourn, please, I'm sorry, I didn't hear who, okay, who did the motion? Okay, Mark and Jack, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried,
Thank
thank you
you
very
all.
much, everyone.